Chief Instructor Ryan Cole ripped the pistol out of Claire Bennett's hands and threw it into the dirt in front of 300 soldiers. "You don't get a weapon," he shouted, his voice cracking across the field. "People like you never earned one." He kicked the gun further away and turned to the crowd, laughing. "Watch closely. This is what a mistake looks like when it finally breaks." Claire said nothing. She just breathed once, slow and steady, while the whole base roared at her humiliation. Before we go further, please take 1 second to subscribe to this channel and follow Claire's story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you are watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The bus arrived at Fort Blackstone at 4:47 in the morning, and Ryan Cole was already counting the ways this new class was going to disappoint him. He stood at the gate with his coffee going cold in his hand, watching 17 figures step down onto the gravel one by one. He knew the type before they even hit the ground. Big shoulders, tight jaws, that particular walk men got when they had spent too many years being told they were the best of the best. Combat veterans, Rangers, a couple of former Marine recon who thought Blackstone would be a checkbox on their record. Cole had run this selection program for 11 years. He had washed out more men than most instructors ever trained. He liked to say that Blackstone did not build soldiers. Blackstone found out which soldiers were lying to themselves. He watched them line up, and one by one they matched his expectations. Confident, loud in the way scared men get loud. He could work with that. He knew exactly how to take a man who thought he was invincible and show him the truth. And then the last person stepped off the bus, and Cole stopped chewing. She was small. Not weak-looking, but small, the kind of build you would walk right past on a city street. She wore civilian boots scuffed at the toe and a plain jacket with no insignia. No unit patch, no rank, nothing to say who she was or where she had come from. She carried a single canvas bag over her shoulder, and she moved like someone who did not want to be noticed. Cole looked down at the roster in his hand. 16 names he recognized from their files. Thick files full of medals and deployments and letters of recommendation. And then one line at the bottom, Bennett Claire, and nothing else. No history, no prior service listed, no commanding officer. The entire record was blacked out, line after line of redaction, until the page looked more like a censored document than a personnel file. "What in the world is this?" Cole muttered. His second in command, a wiry sergeant named Doyle, leaned in. "Paperwork glitch, probably. Happens sometimes. Someone forgot to attach the real file. 16 killers and 1 secretary," Cole said loud enough for the front row to hear. A few of the candidates chuckled. "Somebody in an office made a mistake and sent us a tourist." He walked down the line slowly, the way he always did, letting the silence do the work. He stopped in front of a broad-shouldered man named Reyes, former Special Forces. Chest out, chin up. Cole gave him a small nod. He stopped in front of a lean, hard-eyed veteran named Kowalski and did the same. Then he stopped in front of Claire Bennett. She looked up at him, not defiant, not scared, just steady. Her eyes were the flat gray of a winter sky, and there was something in them that Cole did not like, though he could not have told you why. "You lost sweetheart?" he asked. "No, sir," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "You know where you are." "Fort Blackstone, sir." "You know what we do here?" "Yes, sir." Cole leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "Then you know you don't belong here. So let me save you 2 weeks of embarrassment. That bus doesn't leave until 6. You go get back on it, and nobody has to watch you fall apart." For a moment, she said nothing, and then she said the thing that would haunt Ryan Cole for the rest of his life, though he did not know it yet. "I'll stay, sir, if that's all right." The way she said it, not begging, not fighting, just a simple statement, like she was declining a second cup of coffee. Cole felt something cold move up the back of his neck, and he did not understand it, so he did what men like him always do when they do not understand something. He got angry. "Fine," he snapped, straightening up. "You want to stay? You stay, but I promise you this, I am going to be watching you every single second. And the first time you break, and you will break, I am going to make sure everyone here sees it." He turned to the group. "The rest of you, this is not a game. 17 of you got off that bus. History says maybe 3 of you will finish. Look to your left. Look to your right. Most of you are gone already. You just don't know it yet. He let that sit. Then he pointed at Claire without looking at her. And her. She's gone by Thursday. The candidates laughed again, louder this time. And in the back of the group, a woman in an observer's uniform, Lieutenant Emily Carter, did not laugh. Emily was there to evaluate the instructors, not the candidates, a fact Cole knew and resented. She had a clipboard and a job to watch how the training was run, and she watched Claire Bennett receive her sentence without so much as a flinch, and she made a small note that she could not quite explain to herself. The woman had not blinked, not once. The first 3 days were designed to destroy the body before the mind ever got a chance to catch up. They ran before dawn. They carried logs until their shoulders bled. They stood in cold water up to their chests and held rifles over their heads until men who had survived actual firefights started to shake and cry. Cole ran the whole thing like a conductor running an orchestra of pain, and he was good at it. He knew exactly when to push and exactly when to let a man believe he had a moment to rest right before he took it away. And through all of it, he watched Claire Bennett. He gave her the extra tasks. When the group did 50 push-ups, she did 75. When they carried a log, he put her on the heavy end. When they finished a run, he sent her out for another lap while the others drank water and watched. He was trying to break her in front of everyone. That was the whole point. He wanted the others to see her crack so the lesson would land. He wanted them to understand that Blackstone did not care who you were or how you got there. Blackstone only cared whether you could take it, but she took it. That was the strange part. She never complained. She never asked him for a break. She never gave him the satisfaction of a single word of protest. She just did the extra lap and came back and stood in formation and waited for the next thing. By the end of day 3, Cole was more furious than when he started. She's playing possum, he told Doyles that night in the instructor's office. She's saving her energy. She thinks if she just endures long enough, we'll get bored. Well, I don't get bored. Doyle looked up from his paperwork. She hasn't fallen behind on a single event, Chief. Not one. I checked the times. That's because we haven't hit her hard enough yet. Chief, Doyle set down his pen. The girl did 75 push-ups and then ran an extra lap and came back breathing normal. Reyes threw up after the log carry. Kowalski cramped up in the water. She hasn't so much as sat down. Cole stared at him. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. I'm just telling you what I saw. Cole did not like what Doyle was telling him. So he decided that the problem was that he simply had not pushed hard enough yet. Tomorrow was weapons training. He would find her weakness there. Everyone had a weakness on the range. And when he found it, he would make sure the whole class was watching. Weapons training was where Ryan Cole was certain the mask would come off. You could fake endurance. You could fake toughness. A stubborn person could grit their teeth and take a beating and pretend they were fine. But you could not fake competence with a weapon. Either you knew how to handle a rifle or you did not, and the moment a person picked one up, the truth came out. He lined the class up on the range and had them run drills, draw and fire, reload, malfunction clearing, transition from primary to secondary, the kind of thing the combat veterans could do in their sleep. Reyes was fast, Kowalski was faster. The men moved their weapons like they were extensions of their own arms, and Cole nodded along pleased because this was what he understood. Then he came to Claire. Bennett, draw and fire 5 rounds, center mass, go. And Claire moved slowly. That was the thing everyone noticed. Where the others were fast and sharp and aggressive, Claire was slow. Her hands moved without any hurry at all. She drew the weapon like she had all the time in the world, brought it up smoothly, and fired. 5 rounds, 5 holes, all of them within an area you could cover with the palm of your hand dead center. But it was slow, and in a world where speed was survival, slow looked like weakness. Cole seized on it. Too slow, Bennett, he barked. You'd be dead. Your whole team would be dead. Again, faster this time. She did it again. Slow, smooth, 5 rounds, all center. Faster, slow, smooth, 5 center. Cole was almost shouting now. You think this is a range day at the country club? Move like your life depends on it. And here is the thing that only one person in that whole formation noticed. Lieutenant Emily Carter was standing off to the side with her clipboard, and she was watching Claire's hands, and something did not add up. Because Claire's hands were not slow the way a beginner's hands are slow. A beginner is slow because They are unsure because they have to think about each step because their fingers fumble at the reload and their eyes drift off the sights. That is nervous slow. That is, I do not know what I am doing slow. Claire's hands were slow, the way a master craftsman's hands are slow. Every motion was deliberate. There was no wasted movement anywhere. Her draw did not have a single hitch in it. Her reload was one smooth, continuous action, with no fumble, no reset, no correction. She was not slow because she did not know. She was slow because she was choosing to be the way a professional pianist can play a piece at half speed without a single wrong note. Emily had spent enough time around real operators to know the difference. And what she was looking at was not a beginner. She wrote a single word on her clipboard and then stared at it. Deliberate. Then she looked up and she caught Claire's eyes for just a second. And Claire looked back at her calm and unreadable and then looked away. But in that half second, Emily felt like she had accidentally seen something she was not supposed to see. Like walking into a room and catching a glimpse of something before someone closed the door. Cole did not notice any of it. Cole only saw slow. Pathetic, he announced to the class. This is what happens when you send us a mistake. She can shoot a target that isn't shooting back real slow in the middle of the day. Congratulations, Bennett. You've mastered the shooting gallery. A few of the men laughed. But out there, you'd be a body, and you'd get your whole team killed trying to save you. Claire holstered her weapon. Yes, sir, she said. That was all. Yes, sir. And that more than anything was what began to get under Ryan Cole's skin. Because a normal person, an innocent person who was actually failing would eventually crack. They would argue. They would cry. They would quit. They would at the very least look hurt. Claire just kept saying, yes, sir. Like the insults did not touch her at all. Like they were weather she was waiting to pass. That night, Emily Carter did something she was not supposed to do. She pulled up the personnel files for the class on the base computer system, telling herself it was part of her job to understand the candidates in order to evaluate the instruction. 16 files opened normally. She read through them. Reyes, 12 years and 2 combat deployments. Kowalski decorated a mess of commendations. Solid men, all of them. Then she clicked on Bennett Claire. The screen paused. A little wheel spun, and then a message appeared that Emily had never seen before in all her years in the service. Access restricted. Clearance insufficient. This action has been logged. She stared at it. Her mouth went dry. She was an officer with a security clearance. She could see the files of active combat operators, and a supposed washout, a supposed paperwork error, a supposed mistake, who had been sent to Fort Blackstone by accident, had a file that she was not cleared to open. A file that had just logged the fact that she had tried. Emily closed the laptop very slowly as if it might make a sound and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, she watched Claire Bennett stand in formation and take Cole's abuse without a word, and she thought, you are not a mistake. I do not know what you are, but you are not a mistake. The days that followed only deepened the mystery for Emily Carter, even as they hardened Cole's certainty, because the strange things kept happening, and only Emily seemed to be keeping track. In hand-to-hand combat training, Cole loved to pit the candidates against each other, and he made a special point of putting Claire up against the biggest men in the class. He wanted to see her get thrown around. He wanted the physical proof that she did not belong, and she lost. Every time. Reyes put her on the ground. Kowalski put her on the ground. A former wrestler named Torres put her on the ground twice. She lost match after match, and Cole grinned every time and told the class this was what a mistake looked like. But Emily was watching the losses, and the losses were wrong. Because Claire did not lose the way a weaker fighter loses. A weaker fighter loses because they get overpowered, because they cannot stop what is coming, because they get caught off balance and cannot recover. You can see it in their body, the panic, the flailing, the moment where control slips away. Claire lost the way someone loses when they choose to lose. Emily saw it in the sparring match against Torres. Torres came in hard, and for just a fraction of a second, Claire's hand moved to a position that Emily recognized. It was a control position, a setup for a joint lock that would have snapped Torres's elbow if she had followed through. Her body had gone there instinctively faster than thought, and then she stopped. She caught herself, and she deliberately let the position go, and she let Torres take her down instead. She chose the fall. She saw the opening to hurt him, Her trained body went there automatically, and she overrode it and took the loss on purpose. Nobody else saw it. It happened in less than a second. But Emily saw it, and her heart started to pound because now she understood the pattern. Claire was not hiding her weakness. She was hiding her strength. Every slow draw on the range, every deliberate loss on the mat, every extra lap she ran without complaint. It was all the same thing. She was a person carefully, meticulously, second by second, pretending to be less than she was. And she was doing it so well that everyone believed it. Everyone except the one observer who happened to know what to look for. The question that kept Emily up at night was simple and terrible. Why? Why would someone like that come to a place like this? Why would someone who could clearly break a man's arm choose to be thrown to the ground and laughed at day after day? Why would someone with a classified file that an officer could not open let a bully like Cole scream in her face? What was she doing here? What was she waiting for? Emily started to watch Cole differently after that. She started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Cole was not the one running the test. The navigation exercise was where the pattern nearly broke into the open. Cole split the class into teams and sent them into the backcountry with maps and a set of coordinates, a punishing course through miles of rough terrain with checkpoints they had to reach in sequence. It was meant to test leadership and endurance and the ability to think clearly when you were exhausted and lost. He put Claire on the weakest team, of course, a team led by a man named Vickers who had a habit of second-guessing himself. Cole and Emily followed the teams at a distance to observe. And the strangest thing happened. Vickers' team, the team with the mistake on it, the team Cole expected to come in dead last, started outperforming everyone. They took a line through the terrain that shaved nearly a mile off the obvious route. They hit their checkpoints faster than any team Cole had run in years. And when Cole got close enough to observe them working, he could not figure out how. Vickers seemed to be leading. He was the one calling out directions, pointing at the map, making the decisions. But Emily was closer, and Emily heard it. Every few minutes, right before Vickers made a call, Claire would say something. Quiet, almost too quiet to hear. Just a word or two. The ridgeline's faster, or we're drifting east, or water crossings shallow to the left. And Vickers, without even seeming to realize he was doing it, would incorporate her words into his own decision and then announce it like it was his idea. She was navigating the entire team. She was doing it invisibly, letting Vickers take the credit, feeding him the right answers so quietly and so naturally that he genuinely believed he was leading. She was correcting elite soldiers without any of them knowing they were being corrected. Vickers' team came in first by a margin so large that Cole made them do the whole thing again, convinced they had cheated. They ran it again. They came in first again. That night, Cole was rattled, though he would never have admitted it. There's something off about that woman, he told Doyle Long. I don't know how she's doing it, but she's throwing off my read on the whole class. Doyle, who had been keeping his own quiet count, said something that made Cole go still. Chief, what if she's not off? What if she's the most on person we've ever had come through this gate? What if you've been looking at it backwards this whole time? Cole stared at him. Whose side are you on? I'm not on anybody's side. I'm just telling you what the numbers say. And the numbers say that the mistake is beating your best men at everything, and she's doing it while pretending to lose. For the first time in 11 years, Ryan Cole did not have a comeback. He sat there in the dark office and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not quite fear, but the cold edge of it. The feeling you get when you realize the ground under you might not be where you thought it was. And then he did the thing that men like Cole always do when they feel that cold edge. Instead of pulling back, he decided to push harder. He decided that if he could not break her with pain, and he could not break her on the range, and he could not break her on the mat, then he would break her the only way he had left. He would put her in front of everyone, strip away everything she had, and force her into a situation she could not fake her way out of. He would make the final evaluation a spectacle, and he would make her the center of it. Final day, he said to Doyle. I want the whole base there, every instructor, every candidate, the visiting brass, all of them. I want an audience. Doyle frowned. For what? Cole's jaw tightened. For the last time anyone ever mistakes Fort Blackstone for a charity. 2 days before the final evaluation, something happened that Emily Carter did not tell anyone about, and that she would think about for the rest of her career. She was walking back to her quarters late at night past the empty training grounds when she saw a single figure out on the range in the dark. No lights, no noise, just a shape moving. She stopped and watched. It was Claire. And Claire was moving in a way that Emily had never seen before, not in 3 weeks of watching her pretend to be slow and clumsy. She was running through some kind of sequence in the dark alone with no one to see. And she was fast. She was fast in a way that did not look human. Her movements flowed one into the next with no beginning and no end, like water. Like something that had been practiced 10,000 times until thought fell away entirely and only the doing remained. Emily could not have described exactly what she was watching. Some kind of combat form, some kind of drill. But the speed of it, the total economy of it, the way not a single motion was wasted, told her more than any classified file ever could. For 3 weeks, this woman had been drawing her weapon in slow motion and letting men throw her on the ground. And here alone in the dark where she thought no one could see, this was what she actually was. Claire stopped moving. She went completely still. And then without turning around, she said into the dark in that same quiet, even voice, "Good night, Lieutenant." Emily's blood went cold. She had made no sound. She was sure of it. She was standing in shadow 100 feet away, and this woman had known she was there the entire time. "Good night," Emily managed. Claire picked up her jacket and walked off toward the barracks without another word, and Emily stood there in the dark for a long time, her heart hammering, understanding at last that she had spent 3 weeks watching a lion pretend to be a house cat, and that the only reason the lion was pretending was because it was waiting for something. She just did not know what. The morning of the final evaluation arrived cold and clear. Cole had gotten his audience. Word had spread through the base the way word does, and the training ground filled with people. Instructors, candidates, support staff who had heard there was going to be a show. And near the reviewing area, a cluster of visiting officers Emily did not recognize, higher ranking than anyone who normally came to Blackstone, standing very still and saying very little. Emily noticed them. She noticed that they had arrived without announcement. She noticed that no one seemed to know exactly who they were or why they were there. And she noticed most of all that not one of them was watching Cole. Every single one of them was watching Claire Bennett. Cole gathered the class in the center of the ground with the crowd ringed around them, and he was in his element now, his voice booming, playing to the audience. 3 weeks ago, 17 of you got off a bus, he called out. Some of you have earned your place here, and some of you... He turned slowly, theatrically, until he was facing Claire. Some of you never should have gotten off that bus at all. The crowd murmured. Cole was smiling now, the smile of a man who was sure he had already won. We had a woman come through here who thinks she can hide, who shoots slow and fights slow and hopes nobody notices she doesn't belong. Well, today there's nowhere to hide, Bennett. Today in front of everyone, we find out what you're really made of. He walked up to her, and then he reached out and he took the pistol from her holster and he held it up over his head for the whole crowd to see. She can't fight without it, he shouted, and the crowd laughed, 300 people laughing at once. Let's find out what she can do without her little toy. He threw the pistol into the dirt, and Claire Bennett looked at the gun lying in the dirt, and then she looked up at Ryan Cole, and for the first time in 3 weeks, something changed in her face. It was very small. Anyone else would have missed it. But Emily Carter saw it, and Emily Carter felt the hair stand up on the back of her neck, because for 3 weeks, Claire's eyes had been calm and flat and patient. And now, for just a moment, they were something else entirely. They were the eyes of the woman on the range in the dark, and what Emily saw in them was not fear, and it was not anger. It was permission, like a door that had been locked for 3 weeks had just quietly been unlocked. Cole turned to the crowd, arms wide, soaking in the laughter, completely unaware that the ground had just shifted under his feet, that the visiting officers had gone very still, that the observer with the clipboard had stopped breathing. 5 instructors, he announced, full contact scenario. Her alone, no weapon. Let's see the mistake fight her way out of that. He gestured, and from the edge of the crowd, 5 of Blackstone's best came forward. Big men, hard men, the best close combat instructors on the base, men who had never lost a scenario in their lives. And Claire Bennett, standing alone in the center of 300 people with her weapon in the dirt, and the whole base laughing at her, did something that made Emily Carter's clipboard slip from her hands. She closed her eyes, and she breathed. Once, slow and deep and steady. The exact same breath she took every single time before she fired 5 perfect rounds and pretended it was hard. And in the reviewing area, the highest ranking of the unknown officers leaned very slightly toward the man beside him and said something quiet, and the man nodded, and neither of them was smiling, and neither of them looked the least bit worried about the woman standing alone against 5 men. They looked like men who had come a very long way to watch something they already knew the ending to. Claire opened her eyes. The crowd was still laughing. They would not be laughing for very much longer. The 5 instructors spread out around her the way wolves spread out around something they have already decided is dead. They did not rush. That was the professional courtesy of men who had done this 1,000 times. The lead instructor, a mountain of a man named Barrett, who taught close quarters combat to people who killed for a living, actually held up a hand to slow the others down. He wanted to make it last. He wanted the crowd to enjoy it. He wanted the mistake to feel every second of what was coming. "Take it easy on her, boys," Barrett called out, grinning. "We don't want to hurt the paperwork." The crowd howled. 300 people, and it felt like all of them were laughing at once, and Cole stood off to the side with his arms crossed and the smile of a man watching his plan come together exactly the way he wanted it. Claire Bennett stood in the middle of it all with her hands loose at her sides. And Emily Carter, kneeling to pick her clipboard up out of the dirt, kept her eyes on Claire's hands, because she had learned in 3 weeks that Claire's hands always told the truth before her face did. And what she saw made her forget the clipboard entirely. Claire's hands were relaxed, completely relaxed, not the false calm of someone bracing for pain. The real bottomless calm of someone who was not afraid because there was nothing here to be afraid of. Barrett moved first. He came in fast for a man his size, a straight, overwhelming rush meant to bury her under sheer mass before she could react, the kind of opening that had ended 100 scenarios before they started. And Claire was not there. Nobody in the crowd could have told you exactly how she moved. One instant she was standing in front of Barrett, and the next instant she had slipped to the outside of his arm, and her hand had found his wrist, and she used his own momentum, all 300 pounds of it, to send him past her and down. He hit the ground so hard the sound of it cut straight through the laughter. The laughter stopped for exactly 1 heartbeat, and then it started again louder because the crowd decided it had to be luck. A big man moving too fast, a slippery patch of ground, an accident. Barrett was already scrambling up, and his face had gone from amused to something else. That was the first crack in the wall, and only Emily saw it for what it was. The second instructor, a lean, fast man named Ortega, did not make Barrett's mistake. He came in controlled, hands up, looking for a clean grip, the textbook approach. He got one hand on Claire's collar. He never got the second. Her arm moved in a short circle too fast to follow, and the grip that had taken Ortega years to perfect simply came apart in his hand, and then somehow his own arm was folded up behind his own back, and his face was in the dirt beside Barrett, and he was making a sound that no one in that crowd had ever heard Ortega make. 16 seconds had passed. Now the laughter had a different quality to it. It was the laughter of people who could feel something was wrong but were not ready to admit it yet. It was getting thinner. Cole's smile had not moved, but his eyes had flicking from Claire to the 2 men on the ground and back. "Get up," Cole said. It came out sharper than he meant it to. "And all of you, together, now." The remaining 3 closed in at once, and the 2 on the ground dragged themselves up to rejoin them, and for a moment it looked like the crowd was right after all, because 5 trained men coming at one person all at the same time is not a fight, it is an ending. Claire took her breath. Emily saw it. That same slow, deep, steady breath, the one before the 5 perfect shots, the one on the range in the dark. And Emily understood in a flash of cold clarity that everything Claire had done for the last 16 seconds had been slow. She had been holding back even now. She had been letting them believe it was luck, letting them regroup, giving them their chance, the same way she had let Torres take her down on the mat. The breath was the sound of the last lock coming off. What happened in the next several seconds, Emily Carter would try to describe to investigators later, and would fail because there were no words for it that did not sound like exaggeration. Claire moved into the middle of the 5 men instead of away from them, which was the last thing anyone expected, and once she was inside their circle, their numbers stopped being an advantage and started being a problem, because now they could not swing without risking each other. She was not fighting 5 men. She was moving through 5 men, and each one of them, the instant they came into her reach, went down. There was no wasted motion. That was the thing that broke people's brains watching it. Every other fight any of them had ever seen was full of effort, grunting, straining, two people fighting for leverage. This had none of that. She touched a wrist and a man folded. She turned a shoulder and a man dropped. She moved past a lunging body and the body kept going into the dirt as if she had simply declined to let it exist in her space anymore. Barrett the Mountain, the man who had told his boys to take it easy on the paperwork, got up one more time because he could not comprehend what was happening to him, and he came in with everything he had, a desperate all-or-nothing charge. Claire stepped inside it, and there was a single sharp motion, and Barrett was on his back, looking at the sky, and he did not get up again. Not because he could not, because his body had finally understood what his mind refused to, which was that getting up would only mean going back down. The training ground had gone completely silent. 300 people, and Emily could not hear a single sound except the wind and the ragged breathing of 5 of the finest combat instructors in the United States military lying in the dirt around a small woman in scuffed civilian boots who was not even breathing hard. 83 seconds. That was what the official timeline would say later. 83 seconds from Barrett's first rush to Barrett's final fall. 83 seconds to take apart 5 men who had between them never lost a scenario in their entire careers. Claire Bennett straightened up. She rolled her shoulders once, a small, unconscious gesture, and she looked around at the men on the ground, almost with something like regret, the way you might look at a task you wished you had not been forced to complete. And then she looked up past the frozen crowd, past the stunned instructors, straight at the reviewing area where the unknown officers stood, and she gave them the smallest nod. Not the nod of a candidate to her evaluators. The nod of an equal reporting that a thing had been done. Emily saw it and felt the entire world she thought she understood tilt on its axis. Cole was the last one to move. For the length of those 83 seconds, he had stood frozen with his arms still crossed, his mind refusing to process the information his eyes were sending it. He had built his entire identity on being the man who could read people, who knew in one glance who would break and who would hold. He had looked at Claire Bennett on day 1 and pronounced her a mistake in front of the whole class, and he had staked everything on it. Every insult, every extra lap, every humiliation, all of it built on the certainty that he was right. And now the certainty was gone, and there was nothing underneath it, and he was falling. He started, and his voice did not sound like his own. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder, trying to reach for the authority that had been his whole life 5 minutes ago. That's enough. Scenario's over. Nobody looked at him. That was the thing that would haunt him almost as much as the 83 seconds. He gave an order on his own training ground, and not one single person turned to acknowledge it, because every eye in that place was locked on the woman in the center. And Ryan Cole understood in that moment that he had already stopped being the most important man there. He had maybe stopped being important at all. I said the scenario's over. He tried again, and he walked toward Claire, and some part of him, some desperate, drowning part, still thought he could grab back control if he could just get close enough. Just put himself between her and the crowd. Emily wanted to shout at him to stop. She could see it coming, and she could not stop it. Cole reached out to grab Claire's arm. He never touched it. Claire's hand came up unhurried and simply intercepted his wrist in the air and held it, and Cole discovered that he could not move his arm at all. There was no strain in her. She was not fighting him. She was just holding his wrist the way you would hold a door shut effortlessly, and every ounce of strength Cole put into pulling free did absolutely nothing. For the first time, they were face to face as what they actually were, instead of what Cole had decided they were. "Chief Instructor," Claire said. Her voice was as quiet and even as it had been on day 1 at the gate. "I'd like my weapon back now, if that's all right." The words hit Cole like a physical blow, because they were his own words turned inside out. If that's all right, she had said it to him 3 weeks ago at the gate, quiet and small, and he had taken it for weakness. And now she was saying it again in the exact same tone, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard, because now he understood that it had never been weakness. It had been patience. She had been patient with him the way an adult is patient with a child who does not yet understand the situation he is in. Cole's mouth opened and nothing came out. Claire released his wrist. She walked past him and she bent down and she picked her pistol up out of the dirt where he had thrown it, and she brushed it off and she holstered it. And the whole time, 300 people watched in silence, and 5 of the best instructors on the base lay in the dirt around them, and Ryan Cole stood there holding his own wrist and staring at the woman he had spent 3 weeks trying to destroy. That was the moment the visiting officers began to move. Emily saw them come down from the reviewing area, and she saw the way the crowd parted for them without being told the way people do when they sense authority they cannot name. And she found herself holding her breath again. The lead officer, an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime giving orders that were never questioned, walked straight across the training ground toward Claire, and he did not so much as glance at Cole. But it was what he did when he reached her that stopped Emily's heart. He stopped in front of Claire Bennett, and he came to attention. And he saluted her, an officer with more stars than anyone on that base had ever seen up close, saluting a candidate, saluting the mistake, saluting the woman who had gotten off the bus with no rank and a redacted file and scuffed civilian boots. The training ground made a sound, then a collective intake of breath from 300 people at once, and then silence again deeper than before. Claire returned the salute, crisply, perfectly, like someone who had done it 10,000 times. "Ma'am," the officer said, and his voice carried in the silence. "Apologies for the theater. We needed it observed under real conditions with real resistance by people who didn't know. You understand?" "I understand, sir," Claire said. "Ma'am, sir," from him to her and from her to him, in the same breath, and nobody watching could make the ranks line up in their heads because the ranks did not line up the normal way. Whatever Claire Bennett was, she existed somewhere off the chart entirely. Somewhere the chart did not go. Cole made a small sound, half a word. Nobody paid attention to it. The officer turned finally and looked at Cole, and his expression was not angry. That was almost worse. It was the mild, distant look of a man regarding something that was not really his concern, an administrative detail that would be handled by someone else. "Chief Instructor Cole," he said, "you ran the evaluation exactly as we hoped you would. Completely genuine, not a hint of suspicion. That was necessary." He paused. "Though I'll be honest with you, some of us thought you'd figure it out around week 2 once she started outperforming your best men. You never did. That's its own kind of data." The words were quiet, and they were polite, and they took Ryan Cole apart more thoroughly than any shouted reprimand could have, because the officer was telling him gently in front of everyone that he had not been running the test. He had been part of the test. He had been a variable. Cole had spent 3 weeks certain he was the one holding the microscope, and he had been the thing on the slide the entire time. "I don't," Cole said. "Sir, I don't understand." "No," the officer agreed. "You don't. That's all right. Very few people were supposed to." He glanced at Emily, then a brief assessing look that told her he knew exactly who she was, and exactly what she had noticed, and exactly when she had noticed it, and that none of it had escaped whatever apparatus he represented. "Almost no one," he added, and Emily felt the weight of that look settle onto her shoulders and stay there. The officer turned back to Claire. "We're finished here. Whenever you're ready." "Give me a minute, sir," Claire said. "There's something I want to do first." And she turned around and she walked back toward Ryan Cole. Emily tensed. So did the crowd. So did Cole, who flinched despite himself. A flinch that 100 people saw the great chief instructor of Fort Blackstone flinching from a woman he had called a mistake. But Claire did not raise her hand. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to speak without the crowd hearing, though Emily was near enough to catch it. "I know what you're feeling right now," Claire said quietly. "I've seen it before. It's the feeling of everything you were sure about being wrong at the same time. It's the worst feeling there is. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." Cole stared at her. He could not speak. "You were cruel to me," Claire went on, still quiet, still even, "every day. And you enjoyed it. I want you to know that I noticed. I noticed all of it." She let that sit for a moment. "But I also watched you run this program, and underneath the cruelty, you're good at the actual job. You break people down to find out what's real in them. That's a hard thing to be good at, and the world needs a few people who are." She paused. "The cruelty, though, the cruelty was never about the job. That was about you." She stepped back. "You built your whole self on being the smartest one in the room," she said. "And today in front of everyone you were trying to impress, you found out you weren't. What you do with that is up to you. You can spend the rest of your life bitter about the day the mistake put you on the ground, or you can be the kind of man who learns something. I don't know which one you'll pick. but I know you'll spend a long time deciding. And then Claire Bennett did the thing that Emily Carter would remember for the rest of her life, the thing that told her more about who Claire really was than the 83 seconds ever could. She saluted Cole. Whatever she was, saluted the man who had humiliated her for 3 weeks, a crisp, respectful salute, not as a candidate to an instructor, but as one professional acknowledging another despite everything offering him a dignity he had never once offered her. Cole's hand came up shaking and returned it. He could not have told you why. His body did it before his mind could stop it. For what it's worth, Chief, Claire said, dropping the salute. You were right about one thing. Most people who get off that bus don't belong here. A ghost of something crossed her face, not quite a smile. You just picked the wrong one to say it to. She turned and walked back toward the officers, and the crowd parted for her. And this time it was not the fearful parting of people getting out of the way. It was something else. It was respect, raw and stunned and total 300 hardened soldiers instinctively giving way to someone they finally understood they had been in the presence of the whole time without knowing it. Emily Carter watched her go and realized her own hands were shaking. She looked around at the training ground at the 5 instructors slowly getting themselves up off the dirt with the dazed expressions of men whose entire understanding of their own competence had just been revised downward at the candidates standing in stunned formation at the crowd that did not know whether to cheer or stay silent and had settled on silence. And she looked at Cole standing alone in the middle of all of it, exactly where the day had started, except that everything was different now. 3 hours ago, he had thrown a pistol in the dirt and called a woman a mistake in front of his entire world. Now that world was looking at him differently, and he could feel it, and there was nowhere on the whole base for him to hide from it. That was when Doyle appeared at Emily's shoulder. She had not heard him come up. His face was pale. Lieutenant, he said quietly, you saw it before anyone, didn't you, the whole time? Emily did not answer right away. She was watching the officers form up around Claire, watching the way they moved, the discipline of it, the deference, and she was putting together a picture in her mind that she was not entirely sure she was allowed to have. I saw pieces, she said finally. I didn't understand them. I still don't. Who is she, Sergeant? Doyle shook his head slowly. I've been in this a long time, and I'm telling you I don't have the clearance to even ask that question. He watched the officers a moment longer. But I'll tell you what I think. I think we all just watched something that isn't supposed to happen in front of witnesses. And I think the only reason it did is because somebody very high up decided it needed to. He looked at Emily. And I think you and me are 2 of the witnesses now, whatever that turns out to mean. Emily felt the cold of that settle into her. She thought about the file that would not open. She thought about the message on the screen. This action has been logged. She thought about the officer's brief assessing look and the word he had used. Almost no one. She thought about a woman moving through the dark on an empty range saying goodnight to someone she could not possibly have seen. And she understood that she had spent 3 weeks watching the most extraordinary person she would ever encounter, and that she would probably never learn a single true fact about who that person actually was. Across the training ground, Claire Bennett reached the edge of the crowd where the officers waited. A vehicle had appeared black and unmarked, and Emily had not seen it arrive. Claire paused at the door. And then, for reasons Emily would never know, she turned her head and looked back across the whole silent training ground, past 300 people, and found Emily Carter's eyes in the crowd with the same uncanny precision she had shown in the dark. She held Emily's gaze for a moment, and she gave her a small nod, the same nod she had given the officers, one professional to another, as if to say, you saw. Of everyone here, you were the one who saw, and that means something. Then she got into the vehicle, and the door closed and it pulled away, and Claire Bennett was gone from Fort Blackstone, as quietly and completely as she had arrived, leaving behind 17 candidates who were now 16, 5 instructors who would never brag about their records again, 1 chief instructor whose life had just split cleanly into before and after, and 1 observer standing in the wind with a clipboard, understanding that she had just watched the beginning of a story whose ending she would never be allowed to read. The vehicle disappeared through the gate, and Ryan Cole stood alone in the center of the training ground where he had ruled for 11 years, and slowly in front of everyone, he sat down in the dirt right where the pistol had landed, and he put his face in his hands, and no one went to him because no one knew what you were supposed to say to a man who had just found out he had spent his whole life being certain about the one thing he had gotten most wrong. Emily Carter picked up her clipboard. She looked down at the single word she had written on the first day 3 weeks and a lifetime ago, the word she had not been able to explain to herself. Deliberate. She had thought it meant Claire's movements. Standing there now in the silence, watching the dust settle where the vehicle had been, she finally understood that it had meant something much larger. All of it had been deliberate. The redacted file that let itself be seen as a mistake. The slow draws. The chosen losses. The quiet corrections whispered to a man who thought he was leading. The 3 weeks of humiliation absorbed without a word. The single breath before 83 seconds that ended 5 careers worth of certainty. Even the vehicle that no one saw arrive. Every second of it, deliberate. She had spent 3 weeks believing she was watching an evaluation of 17 candidates. She understood now that she had been watching something else entirely, and that the true test had never been about whether Claire Bennett belonged at Fort Blackstone. The test had been whether Fort Blackstone belonged anywhere near someone like Claire Bennett. And standing in the wind with the answer written all over the faces of 300 silent people, and one broken man sitting in the dirt, Emily Carter finally knew which way that question had been answered. But the story of that day did not end when the vehicle passed through the gate, because a place like Fort Blackstone does not simply absorb something like the 83 seconds and go back to normal by nightfall. The base spent the rest of that afternoon in a kind of stunned aftershock. Nobody said the word out loud, but everybody was thinking it. Mistake. The word Cole had planted on day one, the word he had watered every single day for 3 weeks with insults and extra laps and public humiliation, the word that 300 people had laughed at just before Barrett made his first rush. That word was still hanging in the air, except now it had turned around and pointed itself back at the man who had spoken it. Doyle was the first to try to put the base back together because somebody had to, and Cole was in no condition to. He stood the remaining 16 candidates back into formation, and he found that his own voice was unsteady when he did it, and he hated that, and he pushed through it anyway. Eyes front, he said. Whatever you think you just saw, you keep it here. He tapped his own chest. Not because it's a secret, it's past secret. It's above all of us. You keep it here because talking about it won't do a single thing except get you attention from people you do not want attention from. Are we clear? Yes, Sergeant, the formation answered, and even that sounded different now, quiet or humbled. Reyes was in that formation, the former Special Forces man 12 years in the one Cole had nodded at approvingly on the first day. And Reyes was staring at the patch of dirt where the fight had happened with an expression Emily had never seen on him, and finally he could not hold it in anymore. Sergeant, Reyes said, permission to speak. No, Doyle said. Sergeant, she beat Barrett in about 4 seconds. Barrett trained me. Barrett trained half the operators I ever deployed with. Reyes's voice cracked. What are we even doing here? What is any of this worth if a woman we spent 3 weeks laughing at can do that without a weapon and without breathing hard? What was the point of any of it? And that Emily realized was the real damage. Not to Cole, to all of them. Every man in that formation had built his sense of himself on being among the best, and in 83 seconds, they had all been shown a ceiling. They had not known existed a level so far above their own that it made their own achievements feel small. That was a wound that would take longer to heal than any bruise Barrett was carrying. Doyle looked at Reyes for a long moment, and then he did something Emily respected him for, something Cole would never have done. He answered honestly. The point, Doyle said, is that there is always somebody better than you. Always. Today you found out how much better it's possible to be. Most men go their whole careers without ever seeing it. You saw it at close range. Now you've got a choice. You can let it break you like it's breaking the chief over there. Or you can spend the rest of your life trying to close the distance, knowing you never fully will, and being a better soldier every single day because of it. He paused. That's the point, Reyes. That's the whole point. That's what she came here to teach, whether she meant to or not. Reyes was quiet. Then he nodded slowly and something in his face settled. Emily wrote that down too, without quite knowing why. Doyle understood, she thought. Doyle understood better than Cole ever had, and Doyle had never once raised his voice. That was the first mini-turning of the afternoon, but not the last. The second came an hour later, when Emily was crossing back toward the administrative building, and one of the visiting officers, a younger one who had stayed behind, while the others left with Claire, stepped into her path. She had not seen him coming. He had that quality, the quality Claire had of being where he wanted to be before you noticed him moving. Lieutenant Carter, he said. It was not a question. Sir, you attempted to access a restricted file 3 nights ago. He said it flatly without accusation, the way you might mention the weather. At 23:17 hours, from the terminal in the East Administrative Office. Emily's stomach dropped. She had known it was logged. She had not expected it to be brought up to her face in the middle of a training ground. I did, sir, she said, because there was no point lying to a man who already had the timestamp. She thought about giving him the official version, the version about evaluating the instruction. And then she looked at his eyes and she understood that this man would know the difference between the truth and the official version instantly, and that giving him the second one would be the real mistake. Because I knew she wasn't what everyone was saying she was, Emily said. I'd watched her for 2 weeks. She wasn't slow on the range, she was controlling every millimeter of every motion. She wasn't losing on the mat, she was choosing to lose and hiding the openings she saw. She was navigating an entire team while letting another man take the credit. It didn't add up. And a person that capable doesn't end up here by a paperwork error. So I tried to find out who she was. Emily lifted her chin slightly. I couldn't. My clearance wasn't enough, which told me more than the file ever could have. The officer studied her for a long moment, and Emily could not read anything in his face, and she braced herself for whatever came next. Reprimand, investigation, the end of her career. Instead, he almost smiled. You noticed the navigation exercise, he said, the whispering to Vickers. Yes, sir. Nobody was supposed to notice the navigation exercise. That was the most controlled variable in the entire evaluation. She was instructed to keep the team's advantage under the threshold of detection. He tilted his head. And you detected it anyway. From how far away? Maybe 40 feet, sir. I could hear her because I knew to listen for it. You knew to listen for it, he repeated. And now he did smile faintly, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a professional, recognizing another professional's instinct. Lieutenant, do you understand that the observation skills you just described are themselves rather rare? Emily said nothing. She did not trust herself to. The evaluation was never only about the candidate, the officer said. You understand that much by now. It was about the environment. How does an unprepared population respond to something extraordinary hidden in plain sight? Do they see it? Do they resist it? Do they, when it finally reveals itself, understand what they saw? He glanced back toward the training ground, toward the figure of Cole still sitting in the dirt. Most of the answer to that question is sitting over there with his face in his hands. He is the control result, the man who cannot see, who mistakes what he cannot understand for something beneath him, and who commits everything to that mistake. He looked back at Emily. And then there was you, the outlier, the one who saw. We noticed you noticing Lieutenant almost as early as you noticed her. The words landed on Emily like a slow wave. She had thought she was the secret observer. She had thought she was the one, watching from the edges, keeping her notes to herself, understanding what nobody else understood. And all along she had been observed with the same care she had spent on Claire. The watcher had been watched. Am I in trouble, sir? She asked and hated how small it sounded. No, the officer said. You're the opposite of in trouble. He reached into his jacket and produced a plain card. No logo, no name, only a phone number. He held it out. There are places in this service where the ability to see what other people miss is worth more than any medal on any of these men's chests. Places that are very hard to find because they're designed to be. We don't recruit by application. We recruit by noticing who's already doing the work without being asked. He pressed the card into her hand. You've been doing the work for 3 weeks. Think about whether you'd like to keep doing it somewhere it matters more. Emily looked down at the card. A phone number, nothing else. The same kind of nothing else that had been on Claire's file. The redaction that was not an absence, but a doorway. Is that? She started and stopped and tried again. Sir, is that where she came from? Whatever she is that what you're offering? The officer's almost smile returned. I'm offering a phone call, Lieutenant. What's on the other end of it is a conversation you're not cleared for yet. He stepped back. Take your time deciding, but not too much time. The number changes. And then he too was gone, moving off across the ground toward a second unmarked vehicle Emily was certain had not been there a moment before, and she was left standing with a blank card in her shaking hand and the strangest feeling she had ever had. The feeling of a door opening in a wall she had not known was a wall. She did not know it yet, but that card was the true reason Claire Bennett had held her gaze across the training ground and given her that final nod. It had not only been recognition, it had been a handoff. You saw. Now it's your turn to decide whether seeing is a thing you want to make your life. But the afternoon still was not finished with Ryan Cole. Because a man does not get to fall apart in the dirt of his own kingdom and simply be left there. Around 1600 hours, the base commander came down personally, a colonel named Hartley, who almost never left his office. And the fact that he came down at all told everyone how far the shockwave had traveled. Hartley stood over Cole, who slowly got to his feet, and the two men had a conversation that most of the base could not hear, but everyone could read from the body language. Emily was close enough to catch some of it. "I've had 3 phone calls in the last 2 hours," Hartley said, his voice low and hard, "from people whose names I'm not going to repeat out loud on this training ground. Do you understand what you did today, Cole?" "Sir, I ran the evaluation as designed. Nobody told me. Nobody told me what she was." "That's exactly right. Nobody told you, because the entire point was to see how this program performs when it doesn't know. And the answer they got, Cole, is that this program under your leadership took the single most capable individual any of these people had ever seen, and it spent 3 weeks calling her a mistake, isolating her, humiliating her, and trying to break her. That's the performance review. That's what went up the chain today. Not her file, yours." Cole's face was gray. "Sir, if you had known, you'd have treated her like a queen and we'd have learned nothing," Hartley snapped. "That's not the problem. The problem is who you are when you don't know. The problem is that your instinct, when you meet something you can't categorize, is to attack it. That's a liability in a training instructor. It's a fatal liability in a man who's supposed to identify talent." Hartley shook his head. "You had the best raw candidate to walk through that gate in the history of this program standing in front of you for 3 weeks, and every instinct you have told you to destroy her. Sit with that." And that was the blow that finally fully landed, the one that all of Claire's quiet words had only prepared the ground for. Cole had built his life on the belief that his instincts were his greatest asset, the thing that made him good at the job, the thing that justified the cruelty. And now, the highest authority on the base had told him in plain words that his instincts were the disease. He did not argue anymore. There was nothing left to argue with. Hartley softened just slightly before he walked away. "Nobody's relieving you today, Cole. That'd be too clean, and it'd waste 11 years of experience this program still needs. But you're going to spend a long time earning back the room. Every one of these people watched you today. You don't get to command men who watched you sit down in the dirt. Not until you show them something different than what you showed them for the last 3 weeks." He paused. "She gave you a roadmap. By the way, I heard about it. What she said to you before she left. You should think hard about whether you're going to walk it. Most men in your position won't. It'd be a shame if you were most men." And then Hartley was gone too, and Cole was alone again, except now he was standing instead of sitting, and Emily thought that maybe that small difference was the entire question of the rest of his life. Whether he stayed standing, whether he walked the roadmap, or whether he found a new place far from here to sit down in the dirt again where no one could watch. Emily did not know the answer. She was not sure Cole did either. She looked once more at the card in her hand. She looked at the gate where Claire Bennett had vanished. She looked at the 16 candidates reforming under Doyle's steady voice, at the 5 instructors nursing their bruised bodies and their far more badly bruised certainty, at the broken man standing in the center of it all. And Emily Carter understood that in 83 seconds, everything at Fort Blackstone had been rearranged, and that the rearranging was not really about who could fight. It was about who could see. Cole had spent 3 weeks looking at the most remarkable person he would ever meet and seeing a mistake. Emily had looked at the same person and seen the truth, and now she held a blank card that was somehow the reward for it. She turned the card over in her fingers one last time, and then she put it carefully into her breast pocket over her heart, and she picked up her clipboard, and she walked back toward the administrative building, through a base that would never ever be the same, carrying a decision she already knew in the deepest part of her that she had already made. The card sat in Emily Carter's breast pocket for 6 days before she called the number. And every one of those 6 days changed something at Fort Blackstone. The morning after the 83 seconds, the base woke up different. There was no announcement, no formation where anyone explained what had happened, but everyone knew, and everyone knew that everyone knew. and it changed the way people walked and the way they spoke to each other. The 5 instructors who had been put on the ground did not appear at breakfast together the way they always had. They came in one at a time, ate quickly, and left because sitting together meant talking. And talking meant remembering, and none of them wanted to remember. Barrett was the worst off. Not physically. Physically, he was fine. A few bruises, nothing a man his size couldn't shake in a day. It was the other thing. Barrett had taught close quarters combat for 9 years. He had put his hands on some of the most dangerous men in the military and shown them what they didn't know. And a small woman in civilian boots had folded him up like a lawn chair in front of 300 people twice. And the second time he had understood in the middle of it that she was being gentle with him. That was the part that aided him. Not that he lost, that she had held back and he still couldn't touch her. He found Doyle on the second day out by the equipment sheds where nobody went in the early morning. "Sergeant," Barrett said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth. If I can. Was any of it real? My whole career? Was I ever actually good, or was I just good compared to men who were also being fooled the whole time?" Doyle looked at the big man for a long moment, and Emily, who happened to be passing near enough to hear, slowed down without meaning to. "Barrett," Doyle said, "you want to know if you're good. Here's your answer. You got put down by somebody operating at a level that maybe 40 people on this earth can operate at. 40. Out of everybody. And you know how I know that number, because I've been around long enough to have heard the rumors about the kind of program that produces people like her, and 40 is generous." He let that sit. "You're not competing with her. Nobody in this hemisphere is competing with her. You're one of the best in the world at what you do. Today you found out the world is bigger than you knew. That doesn't make you smaller. It makes the world bigger. Those aren't the same thing, and if you can't tell them apart, you're going to spend the rest of your life miserable over the wrong lesson." Barrett stood there breathing for a while. Then he nodded once and went back inside, and Emily watched him go and thought that Doyle had probably just saved a man's career with about 6 sentences, and that Cole in 11 years had probably never once said anything like that to anyone. That was the thing that was becoming clear to everyone in the days after. The difference between Doyle and Cole. It had always been there, but the 83 seconds had thrown a hard light on it, and now nobody could unsee it. Doyle built people up quietly. Cole tore them down loudly. And for 11 years, the base had assumed that Cole's way was the real way, the hard way, the way that produced results, and Doyle's way was just softness. Now everyone was quietly reconsidering which one of them had actually understood the job. Cole himself did not come out of his quarters for a day and a half. When he finally did on the morning of the 3rd day, he was a different man, in a way that was hard to describe because it wasn't that he'd become humble overnight. It was more like something had been removed from him. The certainty, the thing that had powered every cruel word for 11 years was simply gone, and without it he moved slower and spoke less and looked at people as if he wasn't sure anymore what he was allowed to say to them. He ran the morning training. He did it competently. He gave the corrections that needed giving. But he did not humiliate anyone, not once, and the candidates noticed, and the strange thing was that they performed better, not worse. Reyes hit his times. Kowalski cleared an obstacle he'd been failing for 2 weeks. Without the fear of Cole's voice hanging over them, the men found they could actually think. Emily watched it and made a note because it was the cleanest possible proof of what the visiting officer had said. Cole's instinct to attack had never made the program better. It had only made Cole feel bigger. The results had come despite the cruelty, not because of it, and it had taken the total collapse of that cruelty for anyone to see it clearly. On the 4th day, Cole did something nobody expected. He gathered the 5 instructors, Barrett and Ortega, and the other 3 in the empty briefing room, and he closed the door, and Emily only knew what was said because Doyle told her later. "He apologized to them," Doyle said, and he still sounded like he didn't quite believe it. Not to the candidates, not publicly, to the 5 men he put in that scenario. He told them he'd use them, that he'd been so obsessed with breaking her that he'd thrown 5 of his best people into a fight he set up to humiliate somebody, and that when it went the way it went, they were the ones who had to lie in the dirt while he stood there with his arms crossed. He said that was on him, that he'd spent their reputations to feed his own ego, and it was the worst thing he'd done in 11 years, and he was sorry. Emily was quiet. How did they take it? Barrett shook his hand. Ortega walked out without a word, the other 3 somewhere in between. Doyle shrugged. "It's a start. It's more than I thought the man had in him, honestly." She got to him. Whatever she said before she left, it got in there, and it's working on him. And Emily thought about the roadmap. What you do with that is up to you. You can spend the rest of your life bitter, or you can be the kind of man who learns something. Claire had planted that in Cole the same way Cole had planted the word mistake in the base, and it was growing the same way, slowly taking over more ground each day. The difference was what grew. Cole had planted cruelty, and it had spread as cruelty. Claire had planted a choice, and it was spreading as a man, slowly, painfully, becoming someone better. On the fifth day, the story tried to leave the base. A candidate, one of the men who hadn't handled it well, made a phone call home and told the story to a brother the way people do, because it was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen, and he couldn't keep it in. And the brother knew someone, and that someone knew a reporter, and by evening there was a phone call into the base press office asking about a woman who had allegedly defeated 5 instructors unarmed in under 90 seconds in front of hundreds of witnesses. The press office had no idea what the caller was talking about, which was true, because nothing had been written down anywhere they could see. But the call got escalated, and within 2 hours, a man Emily had never seen before arrived at the gate. Quiet, unremarkable, the kind of man you would forget the moment he left the room, and he spent the evening having brief individual conversations with certain people, and the story simply died. No threats that anyone could point to. No dramatic warnings. The candidate who had made the call came out of his conversation pale and thoughtful and never mentioned it again, and neither did his brother, and neither did the reporter, and the whole thing evaporated as if it had never happened. That was the fifth day, and it was the thing that finally made Emily understand the true scale of what she'd brushed up against. It was one thing to watch a woman defeat 5 men. It was another thing entirely to watch an entire story about it get gently, completely erased from existence in the space of an evening by people who never raised their voices. The 83 seconds had shown her what Claire could do. The fifth day showed her what Claire belonged to. And the second thing was far larger and far quieter and far more frightening than the first. She took the card out of her pocket that night and looked at it for a long time. She thought about her career, the ordinary, honorable, predictable career she'd been building. Evaluations, assessments, watching from the edges and writing things down. She was good at it. She'd always been good at it, and she'd always assumed that was the ceiling, that the watching was the whole job. And now a blank card was telling her that the watching was not the ceiling, that there was a place where the thing she was uniquely good at, the seeing, the noticing, what everyone else missed, was the most valuable thing a person could bring. A place that had noticed her noticing. A place that Claire Bennett had come from, and that Claire Bennett, with a single nod across a training ground, had suggested Emily might belong to. She did not sleep much on the fifth night. On the sixth day, she called the number. It rang twice. A woman's voice answered, calm and even and unhurried. And for one heart-stopping second, Emily thought it was Claire, before she realized it wasn't, that it was simply that the people who came from wherever this was all seemed to share that same quality, that same bottomless steadiness. Lieutenant Carter, the voice said before Emily had said a word. We wondered whether it would be 5 days or 10. You split the difference. That's a good sign, actually. It means you thought about it seriously and then trusted yourself. That's most of the job. Emily's mouth was dry. I don't know what the job is. No, the voice agreed. You don't. And I'm not going to tell you over an open line. But I'll tell you this much, because you've earned a straight answer for the last 3 weeks of unpaid work. You noticed things that were engineered specifically so that they would not be noticed. Do you understand how unusual that is? We build our evaluations to be invisible to train professional observers. And you, from 40 feet away, caught a variable we'd calibrated to be undetectable. You caught the navigation whisper. You caught the deliberate losses. You caught the difference between slow because scared and slow because controlled, which most instructors with 20 years in cannot do. A pause. You are in a specific and rare way very good at the one thing that matters most in the work we do. And that thing cannot be taught. We've tried. It comes finished or it doesn't come at all. Emily gripped the phone. The woman, Claire, was that even her name? It was a name, the voice said, and there was something almost kind in it. Names are not the important part of what she is. And I'm afraid that's a door that stays closed until you're a great deal further down this road than a phone call. But I can tell you why she looked at you the way she did before she left. You know she looked at you. Yes, She flagged you on day 9 in her own report before you ever tried to open that file. She wrote that there was an observer who was tracking her real capability instead of her performance, and that the observer was doing it without being asked and without any apparent motive, except that she couldn't help seeing the truth. That's her handwriting in a file you'll never read, Lieutenant. She saw you seeing her and she decided you were worth the nod. The voice let that land. People like her don't hand out that nod. In my entire career, I've seen her do it twice. You're the second. Emily had to sit down. She had spent 6 days believing she'd been a bystander who happened to notice something. And now she was being told that the most extraordinary person she'd ever encountered had noticed her back on day 9 and had written her name into a classified file with her own hand and had walked across a training ground full of 300 people specifically to acknowledge her before disappearing. The watcher had not just been watched. The watcher had been chosen. What happens now? Emily said. Now you make a decision that most people never get offered. You can stay. You'll have a fine career. You'll retire with respect and a pension and a wall of certificates, and you'll never once for the rest of your life be asked to do the thing you're actually best at. Or you come to us, and I promise you 3 things. The work will be harder than anything you've done. You will never be able to tell anyone what you do. And you will spend your days surrounded by the only people on earth who see the way you see. A pause. I won't pretend the second thing is small. You'd be trading a life people can understand for one they can't. That costs more than most people expect. Take 1 more day, then call this number back and say yes or say no. There's no third option, and there's no negotiating, and there's no coming back to ask later. That's the last kindness I can offer you, the clean choice. Most people don't get even that. The line went quiet, not dead, just quiet waiting. I don't need a day, Emily heard herself say. And she was surprised by how steady her own voice was, how it had that same evenness, now as if 6 days at the edge of this thing had already begun to change the way she spoke. I've been watching from the outside my whole life. I'm good at it, and I've never once felt like it was the whole thing. I always felt like there was a room somewhere I was supposed to be in, and I couldn't find the door. She looked at the blank card in her hand. You're the door. I knew it the second he handed this to me. I've known for 6 days. I was just afraid to say it out loud. There was a silence on the other end, and then the voice said something that Emily would carry with her for the rest of her life. That the voice said is exactly what she said. Word for word almost. The room she couldn't find the door to. We hear it more than you'd think from the ones who turn out to be right for this. It's how we know. A pause. Welcome, Lieutenant. Someone will find you within the week. You won't see them coming, you never do. You'll just look up one day and they'll already be there. And Emily thought of Claire moving in the dark, saying goodnight before Emily had made a sound. And she understood that she was about to become one of those people, the ones who were already there before you noticed. The line went dead. Emily sat in her quarters for a long time holding the phone, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not fear, though there was some of that. Not excitement, though there was some of that too. What she felt underneath everything was recognition. The feeling of a thing clicking into the place it had always been shaped to fit. She had spent 31 years feeling slightly out of step with everyone around her, seeing things nobody else saw, keeping quiet about it because saying it out loud only made people uncomfortable. And now, for the first time, someone had told her that the out-of-step thing was not a flaw. It was the whole point. It was the door. She thought about Claire Bennett wherever she was, now doing whatever it was that people like her did in the parts of the world with no names. She thought about the nod. Twice in an entire career, and Emily was the second. She thought about the fact that she would never see Claire again, almost certainly, and that it didn't matter because Claire had already given her the only thing that mattered, which was the recognition, one seer to another, that Emily was real. That what she was real. She got up. She walked to the window of Hera quarters and looked out at the training ground where the 83 seconds had happened, where 5 men had fallen and a chief instructor had sat down in the dirt and a woman had picked her pistol up and walked away into a black car that no one saw arrive. Down on the ground, in the last light of the 6th day, she could see a single figure. Cole. He was out there alone walking the perimeter of the training ground slowly, and she watched him for a while and she realized he was not brooding. He was practicing. He had a training knife in his hand, and he was moving through the basic close combat forms slowly badly. The forms he'd taught 1,000 times, but had apparently never really respected until a woman had used them to fold up his 5 best men. He was trying to feel what she had felt. He was trying in his clumsy, broken, starting over way to understand. He was walking the roadmap. Emily watched the chief instructor of Fort Blackstone practice alone, in the dark, humbled human beginning again, and she thought that maybe that was the real 83 seconds. Not the fight. The fight had only been the crack. This was what came through the crack afterward. A cruel man learning to be a student again at 52 years old because a woman he had wronged had, instead of destroying him, handed him a choice and trusted him to make the right one. And Emily thought that she finally understood the whole shape of what she'd witnessed, the things she'd been circling for 3 weeks and 6 days. Claire Bennett had not come to Fort Blackstone to prove anything. She'd had nothing to prove. Someone who could do what she did in 83 seconds did not need the validation of a selection program. She had come to be a mirror. She had walked into a place built entirely on judging people, at a glance on deciding in one look who belonged and who was a mistake. And she had held up a mirror to it, and the place had failed the test spectacularly, and in failing it had been forced to see itself. Cole had seen himself. The 5 instructors had seen themselves. The candidates had seen themselves, and Emily had seen herself too, but she had seen something different in the mirror than the rest of them, because she had been the only one looking at Claire instead of at her own reflection. The rest of them had looked at Claire and seen what they wanted her to be. A mistake, a washout, an easy target, a thing to feel superior to. Emily had looked at Claire and seen the truth, and that was why she'd gotten the nod and the card and the door and the room she'd been trying to find her whole life. She put the card back in her pocket over her heart, where it had lived for 6 days. She wouldn't need it much longer. Someone would come for her within the week, the voice had said, and she believed it completely. She would look up one day and they would already be there. She watched Cole finish his forms in the dark, watched him stand for a moment at the center of the ground, breathing hard, watched him look down at the training knife in his hand, as if it had just told him something. And then she watched him walk off toward his quarters, slower than the man who had thrown a pistol in the dirt 6 days ago, but somehow strangely more real. A smaller man, a better one maybe if he kept walking the road. Emily turned away from the window. She had a decision behind her, the cleanest decision she had ever made, and a week of ordinary life ahead of her before the extraordinary came to collect her. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not watching her own life from the outside. She was at last standing inside it. And somewhere out beyond the gate, in a part of the world with no name on any map, Emily would ever be allowed to see a woman in scuffed civilian boots, was already moving toward the next place that needed a mirror held up to it, carrying a redacted file and a quiet, even voice, and the memory of a young lieutenant who had seen her true and who would before very long be seeing others true in a room they had both spent their whole lives trying to find the door to. The week Emily waited was not an empty week because Fort Blackstone was still processing what had happened to it, and every day brought something new that Emily cataloged in the quiet, watchful way that had, unbeknownst to her until 6 days ago, been her real profession all along. On the 7th morning, the base got its first outside visitor connected to the 83 seconds, and it was not who anyone expected. A woman arrived at the gate, older gray at the temples, carrying herself with the erect precision of someone who had served a very long time, and she asked to speak with the base commander about a training incident. Word went around fast. She was a retired general, and she had not come about Claire at all. She had come about Barrett. It turned out the retired general had trained Barrett herself 20 years earlier, when she was a young, hard officer and Barrett was a young, hard recruit, and she had heard through the channels that people at her level always seemed to hear things through, that her old student had been badly shaken by something. She had driven 4 hours to sit with him. Emily didn't hear their conversation, but she saw Barrett afterward, and Barrett was different, steadier as a way a man is steadier after someone he respects has told him something true. And later Doyle told her the shape of it. The general told him, Doyle said that she'd met one of them before, one of the people from wherever Bennett comes from. 30 years ago, watched one of them do something she still can't fully explain, and it broke her the exact same way it broke Barrett. She spent 2 years thinking she was a fraud, and then she made peace with it, and she said those 2 years afterward were when she became the officer worth remembering. Not before, after. When she'd finally been humbled enough to actually learn, Doyle shook his head. She drove 4 hours to tell Barrett that the worst day of his career is going to turn out to be the most important one if he lets it. Who does that? Someone who was told the same thing once, probably, Emily said quietly, and thought again about the roadmap, about how the thing Claire had planted in Cole was the same thing this general had planted in Barrett, the same thing that had been planted in the general herself 30 years before by someone Emily would never know. A chain of it stretching back through the decades. People who had been humbled by something extraordinary and who had chosen to become better instead of bitter, and who spent the rest of their lives finding the next person on the ground and offering a hand up. It was a quiet inheritance invisible to everyone except the people inside it, and Emily understood that she had just watched a new link added to it and that she herself was about to become part of a version of that chain that went even deeper than Barrett would ever be allowed to see. The retired general left that afternoon, but before she went, she did something that stopped Emily's heart for the second time in a week. She found Emily crossing the yard and she stopped, and she looked at her with a strange knowing expression. "You're the observer," the general said. It wasn't a question. Emily went still. "Ma'am, I heard about you too." The old woman studied her, the way Claire had studied her, the way the visiting officer had that same assessing weight. The one who saw it before anyone. You know what that means, don't you? You've figured out by now what that makes you. Emily didn't answer. She didn't know how much she was allowed to say or to whom. The general smiled a small, tired, knowing smile. "You don't have to tell me. I can see it on you. You've got a card in your pocket, don't you?" She didn't wait for a reply. "I had one once, 30 years ago. I didn't call it. I was afraid and I told myself I was being responsible and I stayed and I had a fine career and I made general and I did good work." She paused and something old and unhealed moved across her face. "And not one single day of it was the thing I was actually built for. I've known that for 30 years. It's the only real regret I have, and it's big enough to fill the whole rest of them." She held Emily's eyes. "Whatever you do with your card, Lieutenant, don't do what I did. Don't be responsible. Be right. There's a difference, and most people go their whole lives without ever learning it, and by the time they do, it's too late to matter." And then she was gone, walking back toward the gate, with her straight old spine, leaving Emily standing frozen in the middle of the yard with her hand pressed flat against her breast pocket, against the card she had already, thank God, said yes to. She had said yes. She had already made the choice this woman had spent 30 years regretting she hadn't made. And the wave of relief that went through her at that realization was so strong, she had to close her eyes against it. She had almost taken a day to think. She had almost been responsible. And instead, something in her, some deep true thing, had made her say, "I don't need a day." And now an old general was walking away carrying a 30-year wound that Emily had, by the grace of one honest impulse, just barely avoided giving herself. That night was the 8th night, and Emily could not sleep at all, but for a different reason than before. Before she had been afraid. Now she was awake with the strange electric feeling of a life about to change completely, of a door about to open, of footsteps she could not yet hear, but knew were already on their way to her. She thought about Cole, and on an impulse she got up and went to the window, and sure enough, there he was out on the training ground in the dark doing his forms. He'd been out there every night since the 4th day. Slowly he was getting better, not good, not anything close to what Claire had been, but better and more than that different. There was a humility in the way he moved now that had never been in the man before. He wasn't performing anymore. There was no audience. There was just a 52-year-old man who had spent 11 years being certain alone in the dark, learning to be a student again, because a woman he had wronged had refused to let his cruelty be the end of his story. Emily watched him, and she felt something she had never in 1,000 years expected to feel for Ryan Cole. Not forgiveness exactly. That wasn't hers to give, but something adjacent to respect. Because the easy thing, the thing almost every man in his position would have done, was to leave. To transfer out, to go somewhere. His humiliation wasn't common knowledge, to sit down in fresh dirt where no one had watched him fall. Hartley had practically offered him that exit, and Cole hadn't taken it. Cole was staying at the place where 300 people had watched him break, and he was doing the hardest possible thing, which was to become someone better, right in front of all the people who remembered exactly who he used to be. That was the roadmap, and he was walking it, clumsily, painfully, one form at a time in the dark. But he was walking it. Emily thought about the difference between the general who had driven 4 hours to lift Barrett up, and Cole out there alone lifting himself up, and Claire somewhere out beyond the gate, and herself with a card over her heart, and she understood that she was looking at variations of a single thing. The thing that separated the people who mattered from the people who merely succeeded. It wasn't talent. Cole had talent. Barrett had talent. It wasn't even the almost supernatural capability that Claire carried. It was something smaller and rarer, and available to anyone, which was the willingness to be humbled and to keep going anyway. To stand in the place where you fell and refuse to leave until you'd become worthy of it. She'd spent 3 weeks and 8 days thinking the story was about a woman who could take apart 5 men in 83 seconds. And it was on the surface. But underneath, she now understood it had never been about the fighting at all. The fighting was just the crack. What the story was really about was everything that came through the crack afterward. A cruel man learning to be a student, a shaken warrior being lifted by his old teacher, an old general's 30-year regret, and a lifelong observer finally finding the door to the room she'd been searching for her entire life. Claire had held up a mirror, and the mirror had shown every single person at Fort Blackstone the truest version of themselves, and now they were all in their different ways, either running from what they'd seen or turning to face it. Cole was turning to face it. The general had faced it 30 years ago. Barrett was learning to. And Emily, standing at the window on the 8th night with a card over her heart, had faced it faster and more completely than any of them, because she was the only one who'd been looking outward instead of at her own reflection when the mirror was raised. She went back to bed on the 8th night and finally slept deeply without dreams, the sleep of someone who has made peace with a decision. The 9th day passed quietly. So did the 10th. Emily did her work, ran her observations, wrote her notes, and waited and told no one. And the waiting itself felt like part of the training, already a test of whether she could hold something enormous inside herself and give no sign of it. She found that she could. She'd been doing it her whole life, she realized. She'd just never known it was a skill anyone valued. On the 11th day, she was crossing the administrative building's main hall when a man she had never seen fell into step beside her, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of man you would forget the moment he left the room. He didn't look at her. He matched her pace exactly. And he spoke without turning his head in a low, even voice that Emily recognized instantly, not because she'd heard this particular man before, but because they all had it, that same bottomless steadiness. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, "you're due to rotate off this assignment in 11 days. When you do, there'll be new orders waiting. They'll look completely ordinary. A transfer to an administrative posting, nobody's ever heard of doing analysis, nobody will ever ask you about. Your family and your friends and every other officer you've ever served with will think it's a lateral move to a quiet desk. That's the cover. It's a good one. It'll hold for the rest of your life." He paused, still walking, still not looking at her. "The work behind the cover is the real thing. The thing you called the room you couldn't find the door to. You were right that it existed. You were right that there was a door, and you were right that you belonged on the other side of it. Almost nobody gets to be right about all three." Emily kept walking, kept her face still, and felt her whole life quietly reorganize itself around a single moment in a hallway. "You said someone would find me," she said low. "You said I wouldn't see them coming." "You didn't," the man said, and there might have been the faintest trace of something like warmth in it. "I've been on this base for 6 hours. You looked right at me twice." And Emily realized with the jolt that he was right. She had. In the mess hall that morning. By the equipment sheds an hour ago, she'd looked directly at this forgettable, unremarkable man twice and filed him away as nobody, as background, as part of the scenery. And he'd been there for her the entire time, exactly the way Claire had been in the dark on the range before saying goodnight. Already there before you noticed. She was going to have to learn to be that. And she understood in that hallway that the learning had in fact already begun. "There'll be more before you go," the man said. "You won't always know which ones are us. Consider that the first part of the training. See who you can spot." And then he peeled off down a side corridor without another word and was gone, and Emily stood alone in the hall with her heart pounding and a smile she couldn't quite suppress, starting at the corner of her mouth, because it had begun. It had actually begun. The door was not just open, she was already through it. She thought of Claire one more time, then the way she'd thought of her 100 times in 11 days. She thought about the nod across the training ground, the nod that meant you saw of everyone here, you were the one who saw. She understood now that the nod had never been a goodbye. It had been a beginning. Claire had looked at a young lieutenant with a clipboard and recognized one of her own kind. Before that lieutenant had recognized it in herself, and she had, with a single small gesture across a crowded field, set in motion everything that was now happening to Emily's life. Two seers on a field full of people who could only look at their own reflections. Emily didn't know if she'd ever be as capable as Claire. Almost certainly she wouldn't. The voice on the phone had made clear that what Claire could do belonged to maybe 40 people on the planet. But that had never been the point. The point had never been the 83 seconds. The point was the seeing. And at the seeing, Emily had already proven to people who engineered their whole existence to be unseen that she was rare enough to be worth finding. She walked out of the administrative building into the light of the 11th day, and she looked around at the base at the training ground, at the distant figures of men going about their work. And she found that she was already doing it, already scanning, already asking herself which of them were watching her the way she was learning to watch. She'd been told to spot who she could. The first part of the training. She caught one before she crossed the yard. A groundskeeper she'd seen a dozen times who moved just slightly too economically for a man raking gravel whose eyes found hers for half a second and then slid away with a smoothness that no groundskeeper ever had. Emily didn't react. She filed him away correctly this time and kept walking and felt something settle into place inside her that had been loose her entire life. She was inside the room at last, and the room she was beginning to understand was everywhere, hidden in plain sight, staffed by people you looked at every day and never saw, and she was one of them now, or about to be, and she would spend the rest of her life being the person already there before anyone noticed, holding mirrors up to places that needed them, and finding now and then in some crowd of people looking only at themselves, the rare one who was looking outward, and giving that one a small nod that meant everything, the way a woman in scuffed civilian boots had once given it to her. 11 days later, Emily Carter rotated off Fort Blackstone, and her new orders were waiting exactly as the forgettable man had promised, and they looked exactly as ordinary as he'd said they would. A transfer to a joint analysis office in a building most officers had never heard of, 3 states away, with a job title so bland that the 2 colleagues who saw her orders actually apologized to her for the posting, assuming she'd been shuffled off to somewhere careers went to quietly die. Emily thanked them and let them believe it. That was the first real test she understood of the life she had chosen. Not the fighting, not the danger, the lying. The endless small daily lie of being someone unremarkable to everyone you loved. And she found to her own surprise that she could carry it because for the first time she was carrying it towards something true instead of away from something false. The days before her departure had one last thing to give her, though, and it came from the last person she expected. It was Cole. On the 10th night, her second to last on the base, Emily was doing her final walk of the grounds the way she'd done every evening since the 83 seconds, and she found the chief instructor out on the training ground in the dark doing his forms the way she'd found him every night for 2 weeks. Except this time when he saw her, he stopped. He didn't hurry to hide the training knife or straighten up into the hard-armored posture he'd worn for 11 years. He just stopped, and he looked at her across the dark ground, and then he did something that would have been unthinkable a month before. He walked over to talk to her. "Lieutenant," he said. His voice had changed too in the weeks since. Lower, slower. The bark was gone out of it. "I've been wanting to ask you something. Figured you'd be gone soon, so it's now or never." "Ask Chief." He was quiet for a moment, turning the training knife over in his hands, and Emily waited because she'd learned that Cole needed room now, in a way the old Cole never had. "You knew," he said finally, "about her. You knew before anybody. I've been going back over it in my head every single night out here, and I keep landing on the same thing. You knew by the second week, maybe sooner, and I want to understand how. Because I looked at the same woman you did every day for 3 weeks, and I saw a mistake. And you looked at her and saw the truth. And I can't for the life of me figure out what was wrong with my eyes." Emily considered how to answer that, and she decided because he'd asked honestly, and because she was leaving and would never see him again, to tell him the truth. "There was nothing wrong with your eyes, Chief. Your eyes were fine. It was what you did with what you saw." She paused. You saw a small woman with no rank in a blank file, and the first thing your mind did was decide what that meant. Mistake. Washout. Not one of us. You made the decision on day one, and after that, everything she did got filtered through it. When she shot slow and perfect, you saw a slow beginner because that fit the decision. When she lost on the mat, you saw weakness because that fit the decision. You weren't looking at her, Chief. You were looking at the story you'd already written about her, and you spent 3 weeks collecting evidence for it. Cole was very still. And you, he said, what were you doing different? I hadn't written the story yet, Emily said simply. I didn't have a decision to protect. So when she shot slow and perfect, I didn't ask myself, is this a beginner or an expert? I just watched her hands. And her hands told me. No fumble on the reload, no hitch on the draw, no wasted motion anywhere. That's not what uncertain looks like. That's what controlled looks like. But you could only see that if you were actually watching her instead of watching your own idea of her. She let that sit. That's the whole difference, Chief. It's not eyesight. It's whether you're willing to be wrong about what you're looking at. You weren't. I was. That's all it ever was. Cole absorbed this the way a man absorbs a blow he's decided not to flinch from. And then he nodded slowly, and Emily saw something settle in him, some last piece clicking into place. That's it, isn't it? He said quietly. That's the whole thing she was trying to tell me before she left. She said I built myself on being the smartest one in the room. And what she meant was I built myself on already knowing. On having the answer before the question was even finished. And a man who already knows can't see anything. He can only confirm. He looked down at the knife. 11 years. 11 years I ran men through this gate deciding who they were in the first 10 seconds and calling it instinct and being proud of it. How many of them did I get wrong, Lieutenant? How many did I break because they didn't fit the story I wrote in the first 10 seconds? I'll never know. That's the part that keeps me out here at night. I'll never know how many I got wrong because I never once considered that I could be. And Emily understood standing there in the dark that this was the deepest place the roadmap had taken him. It had started as one wrong call about one woman, and it had opened up night by night into a reckoning with 11 whole years with the entire foundation of who he'd been. Claire had thrown one pebble, and the whole mountain had come down, and Cole was standing in the rubble of himself trying to figure out what to build in its place. You can't get the old ones back, Emily said, but you've got new ones coming through that gate every few months for however many years you've got left. You can't undo the 11. You can do the next one, right? And the one after that. That's the only version of fixing it that exists, Chief. There's no other kind. Cole looked at her for a long moment, and then he did the second unthinkable thing of the night. Thank you, Lieutenant, he said. And he meant it. Ryan Cole, who in 11 years had never thanked anyone for anything that resembled a correction, thanked a young officer half his age for telling him the truth about himself in the dark. I don't know where you're headed next. Your orders say a desk somewhere, but I've been around long enough to know when orders are telling me to stop asking questions. So I'll just say this. Wherever you're actually going, they're getting someone who sees. Don't let them talk you out of it. Don't let anybody ever talk you out of it. It's the rarest thing there is. I know because I spent 11 years without it and never even knew it was missing. Emily's throat tightened and she nodded, and she couldn't quite speak for a second because it was the truest thing anyone at Fort Blackstone had ever said to her, and it had come from the last person she'd have expected, and that was somehow exactly right. The mirror Claire had held up hadn't just shown Cole his cruelty. It had eventually shown him hers, Emily's, the value of the things she carried clearly enough that he could name it and honor it out loud. A cruel man had become, in the space of 3 weeks, someone capable of recognizing and blessing the gift in someone else. That was the whole arc of it. That was what Claire had been building when she chose in front of 300 people to salute him instead of destroying him. Take care of the ones who come through, Chief, Emily said. That's the only thing I'll ask you to remember me by. I will, Cole said, and Emily believed him. She left the next morning. The Joint Analysis Office was as bland as advertised, and for 3 weeks Emily did bland analysis and waited and watched and practiced the first part of the training the forgettable man had given her. Spotting who she could. She got good at it faster than she expected. There was a man in the parking garage who was always there and never seemed to arrive or leave. There was a woman in the cafeteria who read the same page of the same newspaper for 40 minutes and saw everything in the room over the top of it. Emily cataloged them and gave no sign, and she understood that they were cataloging her giving no sign, and that this silent mutual observation was in fact the interview, the real one, the one that never ended. On the 22nd day, her actual handler made contact, and it was of all people the woman from the cafeteria with the newspaper. She simply sat down across from Emily one lunch, folded the paper, and started talking as if they'd known each other for years. "You made all three of us in the first week," the woman said. "The garage me and the one you haven't spotted yet, which is fine because you're not supposed to have spotted him. He's very good. 3 out of 3 that you were meant to catch, plus you keep looking for a fourth, which is the right instinct even though there isn't one. That's a strong start, Carter. Stronger than most." She slid a folder across the table, thin, ordinary looking. "Your real work starts now. And I'll tell you up front, it's not what you think. You're not going to be doing what she did, what Bennett did. That's a different track entirely, a track for a different kind of animal. And you're not that animal, and neither am I. And that's not an insult, it's just true." She tapped the folder. "You're an evaluator, the rarest kind. You're going to be the person who looks at a room full of people and finds the one who sees. The way you were found. That's the work. We can grow capability. We can train the fighting and the trade craft and the languages. We've got pipelines for all of it. What we can't grow, what we can only find is the eye, the thing you have. So we send the people who have it out to look for more of it. You're going to spend your career being the nod Carter, the one across the training ground. You're going to be the person who recognizes the next you and the next one after that and pulls them through the door before they even know there's a door." Emily sat very still, and she felt the last piece of the whole thing fall into place, the piece she hadn't even known was still missing, because she'd assumed in the back of her mind that being pulled through the door meant becoming Claire, learning to do the impossible things, becoming one of the 40 people on Earth who could take apart 5 men in 83 seconds. And she'd been quietly afraid underneath the excitement that she'd never measure up to that she'd been recruited under some misunderstanding of what she was. And now she understood that she hadn't been recruited to become Claire at all. She'd been recruited to become the thing that found Claire's, the evaluator, the eye, the one whose job was precisely exactly the thing she'd been doing on that training ground, without being asked, without pay, without any motive except that she couldn't help seeing the truth. They hadn't recruited her in spite of the fact that she was an observer instead of an operator. They'd recruited her because of it. The watching had never been the ceiling. The watching had been the whole point, all along, elevated now to the highest possible use. "How many are there?" Emily asked. "People like me, evaluators." The woman almost smiled. "Fewer than the operators, a lot fewer. You can build a soldier who can do remarkable things with enough time and money and the right raw material. There are more of those than you'd think. But the eye that can pick the right raw material out of a crowd, that can see the difference between slow because scared and slow because controlled, from 40 feet, that can catch a variable engineered to be invisible. That's the bottleneck. That's always been the bottleneck. Everybody thinks the rare thing is the capability. It isn't. The rare thing is the judgment to know where to point the capability. That's you. That's what she flagged you as on day 9. Not a potential operator. A potential evaluator. She knew the difference the second she watched you watch her, because she'd been evaluated by one of us once herself a long time ago, and she knew what it looked like from the inside. The woman leaned back. She didn't nod at you because you were like her, Carter. She nodded at you because you were like the person who found her. That's rarer than she is, she knows it. That's why she drove that nod across 300 people to reach you. People like her, capable as they are, they know exactly how much they owe to the eye that spotted them. They don't forget it, and when they see a new one, they mark it because they understand better than anyone that without the eye, all their capability would have stayed buried in some ordinary life forever. Unseen, unused, wasted. Emily thought about that for a long time. She thought about a woman in scuffed civilian boots getting off a bus, being called a mistake, absorbing 3 weeks of cruelty without a word, all as a controlled test of an environment. And she thought about how, somewhere long before that, there had been another day, another place where that same woman had been ordinary, buried in some regular life, until an evaluator like the one now sitting across the cafeteria table had looked at her and seen what nobody else could see and pulled her through a door. Claire had been found once by an eye like Emily's, and Claire in turn had spent one small gesture across a training ground to make sure the next eye got found too. It was the same inheritance Emily had watched at Fort Blackstone, the same quiet chain of people lifting the next person up, except this was the deepest version of it, the one that ran underneath everything invisible, even to Barrett and the general and Cole who thought they'd seen the whole story. They'd seen the fighting. They'd seen the 83 seconds. They'd even seen the humbling and the roadmap and the redemption. But they hadn't seen this, the real thing under the real thing, the truth that the rarest and most valuable person in that entire drama had never been the woman who could defeat 5 men. It had been the woman who could recognize from 40 feet away that another woman was worth defeating 5 men to test. The evaluator was the keystone. The evaluator was always the keystone, and Emily was one now. "When do I start?" she said. "You already did," the woman said. "You started the moment you decided to watch her instead of watching everyone else's reaction to her. Everything since then has just been us catching up to a thing you were already doing." She stood tucking her newspaper under her arm. "Read the folder. Someone will brief you Thursday. And Carter." She paused. "Welcome to the room. You found the door yourself. Most people, we have to open it for them. You'd already got your hand on the handle before we ever showed up. That's the thing about the real ones. They're always halfway through before we arrive." And then she was gone, weaving out through the lunch crowd, unremarkable, forgettable, ready fading from the memory of everyone in the room except the one person who'd been trained by 3 weeks of watching a mistake to never let the unremarkable fade. Emily opened the folder. She wouldn't share what was in it, not with anyone, not ever for the rest of her life. That was the cost the voice on the phone had warned her about, the trading of a life people could understand for one they couldn't. But sitting there in the bland cafeteria of the bland building with the thin, ordinary folder open in front of her, Emily Carter did not feel the cost. She felt the opposite. She felt like a person who had spent 31 years, slightly out of step, seeing things nobody else saw, keeping quiet because saying them out loud only made people uncomfortable, and who had finally at long last walked into the one room in the entire world where the out-of-step thing was the price of admission. She thought about Claire one final time, not with longing, not with the ache of someone who'd lost a person she admired, with something closer to companionship, the strange remote companionship of 2 people doing related work in a structure so large and so hidden that they would almost certainly never meet again and wouldn't need to. Somewhere out beyond the reach of any map Emily would ever see, Claire Bennett was walking into the next place that needed a mirror held up to it. Being underestimated by the next Cole absorbing the next round of cruelty, with that same bottomless patience waiting for the next single breath before the next 83 seconds. And she was doing it in part because a long time ago an evaluator had seen her true. And she'd made sure with one nod that the chain continued. Now Emily was a link in it, not the fighting link, the seeing link. The one that mattered most and got noticed least, exactly like herself. She closed the folder and she looked around the cafeteria, and without deciding to, she began to work. There was a young analyst 2 tables over, Junior overlooked, eating alone. And Emily watched the way the young woman's eyes moved around the room, cataloging, noticing, missing, nothing, filing everything, and doing it so naturally that she clearly had no idea she was doing anything unusual at all. The way Emily hadn't known, the way Claire probably hadn't known once, before someone found her. Emily watched the young analyst for a long moment, the first faint possible flicker of the first person she might ever pull through the door, and she felt the whole enormous quiet machine of it settle into place around her. The machine that ran underneath the world, staffed by people you looked at every day and never saw, finding the rare ones, lifting the next ones up, holding mirrors to the places that needed them. She didn't approach the young analyst. Not yet. It was too soon, and Emily had learned patience from a master, from a woman who could wait 3 weeks in scuffed boots for a single breath. She would watch. She would be sure. And if she was right, then one day in some crowd of people looking only at their own reflections, Emily Carter would find the one who was looking outward, and she would give her a small nod, the way it had been given to her. But Emily did not wait as long as she planned, because the young analyst forced the issue herself in a way that told Emily everything she needed to know. 3 days after the cafeteria on the Thursday of her first real briefing, Emily was walking the corridor toward the secure wing when the young analyst fell into step beside her, quiet, unhurried, and said in a low, even voice, "You've been watching me since Monday. 3 tables in the cafeteria, twice in the parking structure, once in the stairwell, you didn't need to use. A pause. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to know if I should be worried or if it's the other thing. Emily stopped walking. She turned and looked at the young woman, and she felt the ground shift under her, the way it had shifted the day Claire took a slow breath before 83 seconds, because the young analyst had just done to her exactly what Emily had spent 3 weeks doing to Claire. She'd been seen. The watcher had been watched again, and this time Emily was on the other side of it. "What's your name?" Emily said. "Reyes, Anna Reyes." And Emily went very still, because of course it was. Not the Reyes from Fort Blackstone that was coincidence, the world was full of Reyeses. But the echo of it landed on her anyway. The reminder that the chain ran everywhere, that the people who saw kept surfacing in every corner of the structure, waiting to be found. "How long have you known you were different, Anna?" Emily asked quietly. The young woman's careful composure flickered just slightly, the first crack Emily had seen in her. "My whole life," she said. "I always knew things about people before they said them. I always saw the thing under the thing, and I learned to shut up about it because when you tell people what you see, they think you're strange, or they think you're accusing them, or they just get uncomfortable and go quiet." She looked at Emily. "So I stopped saying it. I've spent my whole career being the analyst. Nobody notices filing reports. Nobody reads and feeling like there's a room somewhere I'm supposed to be in, and I can't find the door." Emily felt her breath catch. The room, the door, the exact words. The exact words Emily had said to the voice on the phone, the exact words the voice had said Claire had used, the exact words the old general had lived 30 years of regret around. It was not a coincidence, and it was not a phrase. It was a fingerprint. It was the specific shape of the specific ache that the specific kind of person carried. The seer, the evaluator. The one who spent a whole life slightly out of step and did not know that the out-of-step thing was a door and not a defect. "Anna," Emily said, and her own voice had that evenness now, that bottomless steadiness she'd first heard in Claire, and then in the voice on the phone, and then in the forgettable man, and the cafeteria woman, the steadiness that she now understood was not a personality trait, but a thing that grew in a person once they finally stopped being afraid of what they were. "I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly because your answer matters more than you know. When you watch a room and you catch the thing under the thing, does it ever feel like a burden, like something you wish you could turn off?" Anna thought about it seriously the way the real ones always did. "No," she said finally. "That's the strange part. It doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like the only time I'm actually awake. Everything else in my life feels like I'm half asleep. But when I'm reading a room, when I catch the thing everybody else misses, I feel like I'm finally doing the thing I was built for." She shook her head. "But there's nowhere to do it. There's no job that's just that. So I do analysis, and I feel awake for the 10% of it that involves reading people and asleep for the rest." And Emily understood that she was looking at herself, not metaphorically, precisely. She was looking at exactly the person she had been 6 weeks ago, standing on a training ground with a clipboard, watching a mistake that wasn't a mistake, feeling awake for the first time in her life and having nowhere to put it. And now Emily was the evaluator. Now Emily was the eye that had been sent out to find the next eye. And the machine, in its vast, quiet way, had put Anna Reyes directly in her path in her very first week, either as a test or as a gift or as both, because Emily could not yet tell the difference between the two, and suspected she never fully would. "There is a job that's just that," Emily said quietly. "It's the rarest job there is, and it doesn't advertise, and it finds you by watching who's already doing the work without being asked. And I think it just found you, Anna. I think you just did it to me in this hallway. You caught me watching you from moves I made specifically to be invisible, and you walked up and named all of them, and then asked calmly whether you should be worried. Do you have any idea how few people on earth could do what you just did?" Anna was very still now, and Emily could see it happening behind her eyes, the thing that had happened behind Emily's own eyes on the phone 6 days after the 83 seconds. The slow, dawning realization that the flaw was not a flaw, that the loneliness had a reason, that there was a door and it was real and it was opening. "Are you?" Anna started and stopped, and Emily saw her choose her words with the care of someone who understood that this moment could not be taken back. "Are you the door?" And Emily smiled because it was word for word almost the thing she had said herself. "You're the door. I knew it the second he handed this to me." "I'm the nod," Emily said. The one across the training ground. There was one for me 6 weeks ago from a woman I'll never see again who spent one small gesture across 300 people to reach me because she remembered exactly what it was worth. And now there's one for you. She let that sit. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing in a hallway. There's a process and it's slow on purpose. And part of it is finding out whether you can hold something enormous inside yourself and give no sign. But I'll tell you what I was told, because you've earned a straight answer for a lifetime of unpaid seeing. You were right that the room exists. You were right that there's a door. And you were right that you belong on the other side of it. Almost nobody gets to be right about all three. Ana Reyes closed her eyes just for a second, and Emily watched 30-some years of quiet loneliness begin slowly to lift off a person's shoulders, and she understood at last completely what she had become and why it mattered more than any 83 seconds ever could. Because the fighting was rare, yes, 40 people on Earth, but the fighting was downstream of everything. The fighting only happened because someone somewhere had first seen the raw material and pulled it through a door. Every operator like Claire existed because an evaluator had found them. And every evaluator existed because another evaluator had found them first. The whole vast hidden machine, the one that ran underneath the world, rested entirely on one person in a hallway recognizing another person's true shape and saying quietly, "You are not broken. You are rare. Come with me." Everything else was built on top of that single act, repeated across decades, across continents, in cafeterias and stairwells, and training grounds, one nod at a time. Cole had spent 11 years deciding who people were in 10 seconds and calling it instinct, and he had been the opposite of an evaluator, the anti-I, the man whose gift was for burying talent instead of finding it. And the tragedy of Cole, the thing that kept him out on the training ground at night, was that he'd had the same raw capacity as Emily, the same ability to look at a person and read them, and he'd bent it entirely toward the wrong end. He'd used the eye to diminish instead of to lift. That was the whole difference between the two of them, and it was the difference Emily now knew she'd spent her career choosing every single day with every single person she evaluated, to lift or to diminish, to open the door or to write the story in the first 10 seconds and spend 3 weeks collecting evidence for it. She would open the door. She had just done it for the first time in a hallway for a young analyst named Ana Reyes, who had spent her whole life feeling half asleep. "Anna," Emily said, "I have a briefing in 4 minutes that I can't be late for, and I can't take you with me, not yet. But I want you to do something between now and when you next hear from me, and you will hear from me. I want you to keep watching rooms the way you always have, and I want you to start noticing who's watching you back. Because they're there, Anna. They've been there your whole life in every room, and you filed them away as unremarkable because that's what they wanted. That's the first part of the training. See who you can spot. And when you finally catch one, don't react. Just file them away correctly this time. And know that they're filing you away too, and that the silent thing passing between you is the truest conversation you've ever had." Anna nodded slowly, and Emily saw that she understood that she'd already, in fact, started, that her eyes had already begun moving down the corridor with a new kind of attention. "One more thing," Anna said as Emily turned to go. "The woman, the one who nodded at you, the one you'll never see again." She paused. Was she worth it? Whatever this costs. The lying the life people can't understand. Was she proof it's worth it? And Emily stopped and thought about a woman in scuffed civilian boots, taking a single slow breath in front of 300 laughing people, and about 5 men falling in 83 seconds, and about a nod that crossed a whole field to reach her, and about a chief instructor practicing his forms alone in the dark because that woman had chosen to hand him a roadmap instead of destroying him, and about an old general driving 4 hours to lift up a shaken warrior, and about the whole quiet inheritance stretching back through the decades, person lifting person, all the way down to this hallway, to this moment, to Emily standing here as living proof that the chain held. She was worth it, Emily said. But that's not the answer to your question, Anna, because it was never really about her. She was extraordinary, but the world is full of extraordinary people who die ordinary, buried in regular lives unseen because nobody ever looked at them and saw the truth. She wasn't the miracle. The miracle was the eye that found her, and the eye that found that eye, and the one before that. Emily held the young woman's gaze. You asked if she was worth it. Wrong question. The question is whether you're willing to be the eye, Whether you're willing to spend your one life finding the people the world would otherwise waste and pulling them through the door and asking nothing back except that they do the same for the next one. That's the thing that's worth it, Anna, not her. That, and I think you already know your answer or you wouldn't have walked up to me in this hallway. Ana Reyes was quiet for a long moment. I know my answer, she said. Then I'll be in touch, Emily said. And she turned and walked toward her briefing, 4 minutes gone, exactly on time, leaving behind a young analyst who was standing in a corridor with her whole life quietly reorganizing itself around a single moment, exactly the way Emily's had 6 weeks before, exactly the way Claire's had years before that, exactly the way it had happened and would keep happening in hallways, in cafeterias, and on training grounds, for as long as there were people rare enough to see and generous enough to pass the seeing on. And as Emily walked, she caught herself scanning the corridor, and she caught the forgettable man from Fort Blackstone standing near the secure wing door, the one who told her someone would come and she wouldn't see them coming. He was watching her. He'd watched the whole thing with Anna, and when Emily's eyes found his, he did not look away this time. He gave her a small nod, not the nod of a handler to a recruit. The nod of one evaluator to another, acknowledging that she had just done the work, the real work, the work she'd been made for the first time, that she had found one, that the chain had a new link in it, and Emily had forged it herself in a hallway in 4 minutes on her very first Thursday. Emily returned the nod crisply and walked through the secure wing door into the rest of her life, and she understood that she would never again feel the way she'd felt for 31 years, the slightly out-of-step way, the half-asleep way, the searching for a doorway. She had found the door. She had walked through it, and now she was the one who opened it for others. Somewhere out beyond every map she'd ever see, a woman in scuffed civilian boots was doing the impossible again in some place that needed a mirror. And she was doing it because she'd been found once. And Emily was here doing the finding because she'd been found too. And Ana Reyes was standing in a corridor, about to be found, completely about to spend her own life finding others. The 83 seconds had ended weeks ago. But the thing the 83 seconds had really been about the seeing, the lifting, the quiet, endless passing on of one person's recognition of another person's truth that had no end at all. It just kept finding the next person. And the next. And the next. 2 years passed, and the chain held, and it grew. And Emily Carter became something she could never have imagined on the day she stood on a training ground with a clipboard watching a mistake that wasn't a mistake. Ana Reyes had come through the door within 4 months faster than anyone in the structure could remember, an evaluator being confirmed, and she turned out to be even rarer than Emily had first suspected. So rare that the people above Emily had quietly begun to treat Emily herself with a new kind of respect, because an evaluator's true measure was not her own eye, but the eyes she found, and Emily had found a great one on her very first Thursday. Ana was out in the field now, in her own bland building, in her own bland city, doing her own finding, and every few weeks Emily would get a flat, unremarkable message through the channels that meant Anna had pulled another one through, and Emily would feel the same quiet warmth she imagined Claire must have felt somewhere whenever she heard that the lieutenant she'd nodded at across 300 people had turned out to be worth the nod. But the story was not finished, because stories like this one are never finished by the person who thinks they're at the center of them. And on a gray Tuesday in the third year, Emily Carter got a message that stopped her cold. It came through the highest channel, the one that almost never activated, and it was 3 words long. Blackstone, coal, come. She was on a plane within 2 hours, and she spent the whole flight trying not to imagine what it meant and failing. Fort Blackstone had changed in 3 years. She felt it the moment she came through the gate. It was quieter somehow, but not the dead quiet of a place in mourning. It was the alert quiet of a place that had learned something and was still learning it. And the reason she felt it, she understood within about 10 minutes of arriving, was Cole, because Ryan Cole was still there. And Ryan Cole was a different man. She found him on the training ground, of course, where else, but he was not doing forms alone in the dark this time. He was running a class of 17 candidates, and Emily stood at the edge and watched him work, and what she saw made her throat tighten. He was hard still. The job required hard, and he had never stopped being good at the job. But the cruelty was gone completely, root and branched. And in its place was something Emily had never seen in the old Cole, and had barely believed he was capable of. He was watching them, actually watching them, not deciding who they were in the first 10 seconds, and collecting evidence for 3 weeks, watching, reading each one patiently, letting them show him who they were instead of telling them. And there was a woman in the class, small, civilian boots, no visible history. Emily's heart stopped, but it wasn't Claire. Of course it wasn't Claire. It was just a candidate, an ordinary small woman who happened to have gotten off a bus looking like she didn't belong. And Emily watched Ryan Cole walk up to that small woman, the exact situation that had started everything 3 years before, and she watched him do the thing that had told her the roadmap had gone all the way through him, all the way down to the bone. He did not call her a mistake. He crouched down to her eye level, and he said something quiet, and Emily was too far to hear it, but she could read it in the woman's face, which went from braced to startled to something like relief. And later, when Emily asked him what he'd said, Cole told her, and it was the thing that finally made Emily understand that a person really can change all the way if they're humbled hard enough and given a roadmap by someone generous enough not to destroy them. I told her, Cole said, that I didn't know who she was yet and that I wasn't going to pretend I did. I told her that a long time ago I made the worst mistake of my life by deciding I knew what someone was before she showed me, and that I swore I'd never do it again to anyone as long as I ran this gate. And I told her that whoever she turned out to be, she'd get the same 3 weeks as everyone else to show me, and not 1 second of it would be spent on a story I wrote before she arrived. He paused. She started to cry, Lieutenant, just for a second. And I think it was because nobody in a uniform had ever looked at her and told her she'd get to show them who she was instead of being told. I didn't understand 3 years ago how rare that is, how much people are starving for it. I spent 11 years starving them and calling it standards. And that was the first great turning of Emily's return to Fort Blackstone, the discovery that the man she'd watched break in the dirt had not only survived, but had transformed into possibly the finest instructor the program had ever had, precisely because he now knew from the inside in his own scarred bones exactly what it cost to be wrongly judged and exactly what it was worth to be truly seen. But that was not why she'd been summoned. Blackstone, Cole, come. There was more. Doyle found her that evening, older, grayer, still steady. He'd made chief himself, now running his own program on the base, and he looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't quite read. You know why you're here, he said. It wasn't a question, but it was a little. No, Emily admitted. The message just said come. Doyle nodded slowly. Cole's retiring, end of the month, 30 years. He let that sit. And he asked for you specifically. Went up channels you and I aren't supposed to know exist to find out where you were and get word to you. Took him months. He wouldn't tell me why. Said it was between you two and something he had to do before he hung it up. Doyle studied her. Whatever it is, Lieutenant, I've never seen the man care about anything the way he cares about this. 3 years. He's been building toward something, and I think it's this, and I think it's you. Emily's mind raced, and she could not land on what it might be. And so she did the only thing she could do, which was go find Cole. He was in his quarters packing 30 years into boxes, and when she came in, he stopped and looked at her for a long moment, and then he sat down heavily, and he told her the thing he'd summoned her across the country to hear. I've spent 3 years thinking about her, he said. Bennett, whatever her name really was, every day, not the fight. I made my peace with the fight a long time ago. It's the other thing. He looked at his hands. She had every right to destroy me. I humiliated her for 3 weeks. I threw her weapon in the dirt in front of 300 people. I did everything a man can do to break another person, and I enjoyed it, and I was proud of it. And when it turned out she could have ended me any second she wanted, she didn't. She saluted me. She gave me a roadmap. She trusted me to become better. His voice caught. Why, that's what I couldn't figure out for 3 years. Why would she do that? I wouldn't have. The old me, if I'd been the one with the power in that moment, I'd have crushed the person who'd wronged me and called it justice. So why didn't she? Emily was quiet because she thought she knew, but she wanted to hear him arrive at it himself. And I finally figured it out, Cole said. Us? About a year ago, it came to me out on the ground one night. He looked up at her. She didn't do it for me. She did it because destroying me would have been easy, and she was never interested in easy. Anybody can crush the person who wronged them. That takes nothing. What's hard, what almost nobody can do, is look at the person who wronged them and see underneath all the cruelty a thing worth saving and choose to save it instead. She wasn't being kind to me, Lieutenant. She was being something bigger than kind. She was refusing to let my worst day be the end of my story because she could see somehow that there was a better man in there that even I couldn't see. And she was right. There was. She saw it before I did. She saw it under 3 weeks of me screaming in her face. He shook his head slowly. She had the same eye you have, the eye that sees the thing under the thing. She just pointed it at the worst person in the room and found something worth pulling through a door anyway. That's the rarest thing I've ever encountered in 30 years. Rarer than the 83 seconds, 1,000 times rarer. And Emily felt the whole story turn over one final time and reveal a floor beneath the floor she'd thought was the bottom. Because she'd spent 3 years understanding the 83 seconds as a lesson about seeing versus judging, about the evaluator's eye, about the quiet chain of people lifting each other up. And all of that was true. But Cole had just found the deepest layer, the one even Emily had missed, which was that the very greatest use of the eye was not to find the diamond in the rough, the buried talent, the hidden Claire. Anyone with the gift could learn to do that. The greatest use of the eye, the thing that separated the merely rare from the truly great, was to point it at the person who least deserved your mercy and find even there, even in your enemy, something worth saving. Claire had done that. She'd used the most extraordinary eye in the world not to spot the next operator, but to redeem the man who'd humiliated her. And in doing so, she'd created not a soldier, but a transformed Cole, a man who would now spend whatever years he had left seeing candidates truly, saving the ones the old Cole would have broken. The chain wasn't only about finding the gifted, it was about redeeming the lost. And that was the harder, rarer, more important half, and Emily had needed a retiring old instructor to teach it to her. "Why did you call me here, Chief?" Emily asked softly. "You could have just made your peace with all this on your own." Cole reached into a box and pulled out something small, and he held it in his closed hand for a moment, and then he opened it. It was the card. A blank card, plain, no logo, only a phone number. Not Emily's card, a different one. And Emily's breath left her because she understood what it was before he said a word. "About 8 months ago," Cole said, "a man came to see me, unremarkable. The kind of man you forget the second he leaves the room. You know the kind." He almost smiled. "He watched me run a class for 2 days. And then he found me and he handed me this, and he said that the way I'd learned to see people, the way I'd learned to find the thing under the thing and pull the good out of even the worst raw material was itself a rare thing. And that there were places in the service where an eye like that was worth more than any medal." He turned the card over in his fingers. He said they don't recruit by application. They recruit by noticing who's already doing the work. And he said, "I've been doing the work quietly for 3 years without being asked, and that it had been noticed." Emily's eyes were burning. "I'm too old for it," Cole said. I told him that. 60 next year. My fighting days are decades gone. But he said the same thing your handler probably had said to you, that the capability isn't the rare part. The eye is the rare part, and an eye doesn't age out. He set the card down on the box between them. "But I'm not going to call it. 30 years is enough for me. I want to fish, Lieutenant. I want to sit by water and not read anyone for a while." He pushed the card an inch toward her. "But I couldn't just throw it away. A thing like this you don't throw away. You pass it on. And I've spent 3 years knowing exactly who I'd pass it to if it ever came to me. So I called you here not to take my card. You've got your own. I called you here to tell you where it came from and to ask you to be the one who decides who gets it next. Because you're better at that than anyone I've ever met. You found Bennett's truth from 40 feet away when I couldn't find it from 3 weeks. You're the eye that finds eyes, so..." He looked at her, this hard old man made gentle. "Find the next one and give them this. And tell them it came from a fool who spent 11 years blind and got saved by the person he wronged, and that if he could learn to see, anyone can, and that seeing is the only thing in this whole life that ever really mattered." Emily could not speak for a long moment. She reached out and picked up the card, and it weighed nothing, and it weighed everything. And she understood that she had just been handed, not an object, but a piece of the chain itself, the physical proof of it, a card that had traveled from an unremarkable man to a redeemed fool to her, and that would travel from her to someone not yet found, and from them to someone after that forever. "I'll find the next one, Chief," she said, and her voice had the evenness, now the deep steadiness, but underneath it, For once, it shook just slightly because some things were too large to keep the steadiness through. I promise you, I'll find someone worthy of it, and I'll tell them exactly where it came from. All of it. You, her, the whole thing. Cole nodded, and something in him settled, 30 years settling a life's worth of before and after, finally fully reconciled. Do you think she knows? He asked. Bennett, wherever she is, do you think she has any idea what she started here? That she didn't just pass an evaluation? That she saved a man and found you and you found others, and now there's a whole line of people out there seeing the world true because of 83 seconds in a salute she didn't have to give? Emily thought about it. She thought about a woman in scuffed civilian boots, wherever she was, in whatever place, with no name, doing the impossible again, saving someone, again, being underestimated again. And she thought about the way Claire had looked back across 300 people to find her eyes, and the small nod, and the way it had contained an entire understanding that Emily had spent 3 years unpacking, and had only now in this room with this old man finally reached the bottom of. She knows, Emily said. People like her, they know exactly what they start. That's why she gave you the roadmap instead of the ending. She wasn't hoping you'd change, Chief. She saw that you would. The way she saw me, the way I saw Anna. That's what the eye is. It's not seeing what a person is. Anyone can see what a person is. The eye sees what a person could become, and then it does the one small thing, the nod, the salute, the roadmap that lets them become it. She held the card against her heart the way she'd held her own for 6 days 3 years ago. She knew Chief. She knew before she ever got off that bus what she'd leave behind. That's who she was. That's who all of them are. They don't fight for the 83 seconds. They fight for what comes after, for the whole long, quiet chain of it. That was always the real mission. The fighting was just the crack. Everything that mattered came through the crack afterward. Cole was quiet for a long time. And then this hard old man, 3 weeks from fishing, he stood up and he came to attention and he saluted Emily Carter. Not the salute of an instructor to an officer. The salute of one who had learned to see to another, who had taught the world how, whether she knew it or not. And Emily returned it crisp and perfect, the way she'd learned to do everything now. And the two of them stood in a room full of 30 years in boxes, saluting each other across a blank card, and a story that had started with a woman getting off a bus and being called a mistake. And that would not end. That could not end, because it had stopped being a story about any one person a long time ago and become something that simply moved from person to person forever, like a light passed hand to hand down a line so long that no one could see either end of it. Emily left Fort Blackstone the next morning. She did not see Cole again. He retired at the end of the month and went to his water and his fish, and by every account Emily ever received through the quiet channels, he never read another person for the rest of his life and was happy having spent his last 3 years of service saving more candidates than the old Cole had broken in 11, closing his account with the world well into the black. The small woman with the civilian boots, the one he'd crouched down and spoken to gently on Emily's last visit, graduated at the top of her class. She was not extraordinary. She was not a hidden Claire. She was just a good soldier who'd needed one instructor in her whole life to look at her and let her show him who she was. And Cole had been that instructor because a woman named Bennett had once refused to let his story end in the dirt. That was the chain too. Not every link was a diamond. Most links were just people saved by other people going on to be a little better than they would have been. And that was enough. That was, Emily had come to understand the entire point. She carried Cole's card for a year before she found the one to give it to. He was a young medic in a field hospital, overlooked, exhausted, who had a way of looking at wounded men and knowing which ones would live and which ones were lying to themselves about how bad it was before any monitor told him, before any chart. Who felt half asleep in every part of his life except the 10% that involved reading the truth under a person's fear. Who told Emily when she finally sat down across from him that there was a room somewhere he was supposed to be in, and he couldn't find the door. Emily gave him the card. She told him where it came from. All of it. The unremarkable man, the redeemed fool who'd spent his last years saving the people he'd once have broken. And underneath that, the woman in the scuffed civilian boots who'd gotten off a bus, been called a mistake, absorbed 3 weeks of cruelty without a word, dropped 5 men in 83 seconds, and then with the whole base at her feet, chosen to salute the man who'd humiliated her, because she could see a better man inside him that even he couldn't see. And when she finished, the young medic held the card the way she had, the way Cole had, the way you hold a thing that weighs nothing and everything, and he asked her the question every one of them asked, the question Anna had asked in a hallway 3 years before. Was she real? All of it. Was any of it real, or is it just a story people tell? And Emily, Carter evaluator, keeper of the chain, the eye that found eyes, looked at the young man who would spend his own life finding the next one, and she gave him the only answer that had ever mattered. The answer that was the whole truth of everything the 83 seconds had ever meant. She was real, Emily said. I watched her with my own eyes. But that's not the part that matters, and it's not the part you should carry. Here's the part you carry. It was never about whether she was real. It was about whether you're willing to see the way she saw. To look at a room full of people staring at their own reflections and find the one looking outward. To look at the person who least deserves your mercy and find something worth saving anyway. To spend your one life being the nod, the salute, the roadmap, the door. That's not a story, son. That's a choice. And it's sitting in your hand right now. The young medic looked down at the card, and Emily watched his whole life begin to reorganize itself around a single moment, exactly as hers, had exactly as Cole's had, exactly as it had happened, and would keep happening for as long as there were people rare enough to see and generous enough to pass the seeing on. Somewhere out beyond every map that would ever be drawn, a woman in scuffed civilian boots was walking into the next place that needed the truth held up to it, ready to be underestimated one more time, ready to take one more slow breath before one more impossible thing, and to do it as she had always done, it not for the 83 seconds, but for everyone who would ever be saved by what came after. She had gotten off a bus once and they had laughed, and they had said she couldn't fight without her weapon. 83 seconds later, 5 men had fallen. And 3 years after that, a whole line of people saw the world true, because of a woman who had never once needed to prove she belonged, and who had spent her greatest gift not on winning but on making sure that everyone she touched, even her enemy, even the fool who wronged her, walked away seeing. That was who she was. That was what she started, and it would never ever end.